Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today. Chapter 594. Unexpected Bid. Everyone turned to look at him confused as to why he knocked on the tinted glass door. That's only for bidding, Michael Reptar said, chuckling. Everyone thought that the knock was born from a simple error on his part. He looked back. I know. I'm bidding. At this point, everyone in the room was staring at him wide-eyed, as if they were still trying to process what he was trying to say. It was only until Rena shook her head and broke out of her stupor did they all finally explode in hurried shouts of surprise. Michael. What? You want to join the bidding for the Sudrops? That's crazy. You're crazy. The weakest player in their midst is in the 7th stage of body formation. You know that, right? He addressed their concerns with a nod of acknowledgement. He knew that fighting against people 4 stages above him was nothing less than defeat waiting to happen, but Harbinger convinced him that this was what he needed in order to become stronger. Kukuku. They're stronger than us, so what? We'll use them as a sharpening stone to increase our strength. You're sure about this, right? Yeah, I'm sure, Kukukuku. I am your singular desire to usher the future into this world. I will do whatever it takes to make that happen, no matter the cost. And this is the way to do it. Although he had some doubts, Harbinger did make some good points. He was willing to believe his own diva, especially after he learned that it was a form of his own self, a part of his personality. Of course, as egotistical as it may sound, he was going to trust his own personality. Meanwhile, the crowd down below were immediately confused upon hearing another knock come in at the last second. I already counted 6 knocks, all coming from the major factions. Why did I hear another knock? I heard it too. But that's impossible. There's no one else that can qualify for the bidding. It can't be the mermen because they were the ones who brought out the 15 Sudrops in the first place. Many were trying to think if it came from one of the minor factions, specifically the Rising Six. But from what they knew about the companies, none of them had the financial capacity or the magnetic capacity to participate in the games. Because of this, many thought that the knock was simply a mistake brought on by human error. Maybe someone was too excited about the games and accidentally knocked on the tinted glass. So everyone looked towards Barnaby for some clarity on the situation. However, Barnaby was also confused. Just then, one of his butlers came out from backstage and whispered to him some words that made his eyes go wide with surprise. Barnaby looked back at the butler, making sure that he heard him correctly. But after some verification, Barnaby was forced to realize the truth. He looked up at one of the private suites. He had just been informed that Michael and the rest of the Rising Six had gathered in one room and were watching the auction together. But then Michael knocked on the door and expressed his desire to participate in the bidding, which greatly confused Barnaby. He looked at the tinted glass as if trying to communicate with Michael to ask him if he was sure about his decision. Ahem. You have heard it correctly, folks. There has been another bid for the 15 Sudrops. They are willing to match the 1.5 billion coin bid and compete against the major factions. The crowd immediately burst into whispers of speculation. They just couldn't guess who this mysterious bidder could be. Barnaby cleared his throat and finally announced, "The Reborn company has wished to enter the bidding." As soon as he said that, everyone gasped with surprise and confusion. The Reborn company? Michael had proven himself to be strong enough to be at the top of the Rising Six, but even still the gap between him and the major factions was like heaven and earth. What? The Reborn company? Michael wants to bid? That's not possible. Barnaby quickly eased their worries. I can confirm that the Reborn company is able to afford the 1.5 billion bid for the Sudrops, he announced. Michael's automobiles got up to 1 billion gold coins, so he definitely got the money for the bid. Many were again more than surprised to learn the extent of wealth that Michael had. Being able to spend 1.5 billion and not be drowned in debt and nearing bankruptcy told a lot about how much money Michael had in his inventory. They're just as wealthy as the major factions. What is the Reborn company's business anyway? They definitely didn't get all that money from their business in Metropolis. Last I heard, they just got established not even a month ago. Even the major factions were surprised. Alaric and the other legacies weren't expecting Michael to be as wealthy as he was right now. Not only that, but they didn't expect him to have the guts to contend with them in the first place. The only one who was having the time of their life after hearing this was the Duchess. She was laughing in her VIP suite, bragging to her attendants about how she knew that Michael would do something insane again. Ha ha ha. That kid always has something up his sleeves. But I didn't think he'd do something this insane. At this point, Bo Reptar Rena and the rest of the Rising Six were trying their hardest to convince Michael out of his decision. You know you can't do this, right? Erlos asked. The major factions will bid to have at least 4 Magnetics as their players. And just like he said, Barnaby had to break the bad news. Unfortunately, since this is a simultaneous event, we'll have to go with the accepted conditions with the automobile bid, where it was decided that there would be 5 Magnetics per company during the game. Now I have to ask. Reborn Company, can you provide those players? This was not just a problem of money. It was also a problem of manpower. First of all, Michael had to be at least within 1 or 2 stages below the weakest player in the game. That was the rules set up by the association itself to make sure that everything was fair. At this point, Michael was already disqualified from bidding entirely. He was 3 stages below the weakest member. But even if he had the right diva cultivation stage, he still had one more problem. He didn't have any other Magnetics in his company. The Dragonborns may be strong, but they were normal humans without divas or abilities. And if they had one, then they needed to be in the 5th or 6th stage of body formation as well. I have just been informed that the Reborn Company does not have that capability, Barnaby said with a low tone. He couldn't help but look up at Michael, wondering why he even knocked in the first place when he knew that he'd get disqualified from the get-go. Chapter 595. Law changed. What does this mean? Is the Reborn Company disqualified? I think so. They don't have enough Magnetics to fight. Not to mention Michael is still only in the 4th stage. Barnaby, as much as he liked Michael, knew that he had to follow the rules. He had to give him the bad news that he wouldn't be able to participate in the bid for the 15 sou drops. And because he didn't want this to be public any more than it should be, he decided to go to their private suite to tell him the news personally. But just as he was about to walk backstage, he suddenly saw a golden-haired boy walking towards him. It was Michael. Barnaby quickly moved closer to him, whispering in his ears, "Michael, let's talk. You simply do not have the capacity to participate in the auction. The association is really strict with these kinds of stuff. They will not allow me to allow you to fight people 4 stages above your own strength." Michael didn't seem fazed by the rejection. He anticipated it. "Well, what if they allow it?" he asked. "They can't," Barnaby insisted. "They're bound by their own rules and the rules of Metropolis. Unless you can change the very rules that stood in place since the establishment of Metropolis, then you won't be able to persuade the association to let this happen." But not even that was enough to dissuade Michael of his plans. "So as long as I can change the laws, then they'll allow me to do it?" he asked, reaching down to his pockets. He held in his hands a circular object, one that seemed decorative at first but was actually a priceless item with untold power. Then he brought it out for everyone to see. It was a black medallion with the image of a young Duchess Regina engraved onto it. At first no one recognized what it was. Its jet black luster made it hard for anyone to discern its true nature other than a normal medallion. But Barnaby had a closer look. His eyes widened, his heart palpitated, and his breath was taken away from him as soon as he realized what was in Michael's hands. The medallion!" he shrieked. It was at this point that the powerful minor factions and even the major factions also realized what was in Michael's hands. How could they not recognize it? It was one of the most sought-after treasures in the entirety of Metropolis. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that this black medallion was even more expensive than the sou drops and the automobile. After all, those things could clearly be bought with enough money. In comparison, this black medallion couldn't be forcefully bought even if one had trillions of gold coins. It was literally priceless. Alaric looked down at the stage, his face riddled with shock and confusion. How does he have that? Even the other legacies were dumbfounded. Even with their status as the top companies in Metropolis, even with the contributions they made to the local market, they still hadn't gotten close to getting the privilege of the rumored black medallion. It was completely nonsensical that a new company like Reborn could get the black medallion from the Duchess in such a short amount of time. Why does everybody look shocked? What is that black medallion? You don't know? It's been rumored that whoever held the black medallion was given unrestricted free reign over anything and everything in Metropolis. Even if you commit murder, you can be set free as long as you use the Duchess black medallion. Basically, what Michael held in his hands was a Gatutafale free card. Being bestowed upon with the Duchess authority for just one single time allowed him absolute freedom within the walls of Metropolis. Black medallions could be given out by the reigning royal in any major city in the royal continent. And throughout the entire history from its birth to now, there had only been a handful of documented cases where people were handed out with the medallions. This rarity was to ensure that there wouldn't be too much chaos. After all, having this much freedom could wreck an entire city or civilization. Reigning royals had to be extremely careful about who they would give this to. Usually they were given out to heroes and legends with upstanding morals who dedicated their lives to service the greater good of a community. That way it can be ensured that the medallion wouldn't be abused. But clearly Michael wasn't a celebrated hero or legend. He had barely even been a few months inside Metropolis. Yet he was given a black medallion? That sounded absurd. Is that real? There's nothing special about the medallion itself. It can even be replicated quite easily. But there is one thing that cannot be faked, and that's the Duchess' approval. Only she knows whether that thing is real or not. But before anyone could even doubt the authenticity of the black medallion, they suddenly heard the sound of raucous laughter coming from one of the VIP suites. Just then the tinted glass slipped off to the sides to reveal the Duchess Regina standing on the edge looking down at the auction stage. Everyone looked up at her, their eyes filled with admiration for their Duchess. Ha 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 ha. She laughed, barely able to block her mouth with her hand. Michael, you rascal. I didn't expect you'd do this out of the blue. Michael smiled and shrugged back at her. Well, you gave it to me, so I'm using it. That's true. I did. I expected you to make waves in Metropolis after getting the medallion. But I guess this is good too, ha ha ha. The Duchess's subtle words were enough verification. The black medallion was real, much to the surprise of everyone in the room. And judging from the light and joking conversation between Michael and the Duchess, it seemed that he didn't get the medallion arbitrarily. He gained it after gaining the Duchess' trust, which was the hardest thing to achieve in Metropolis. It's real, Barnaby muttered, looking at Michael with shock. He introduced the two, but he never expected him to impress her so much that she'd give him the black medallion. So can I participate in the bidding now? His question broke Barnaby out of his stupor. I guess so, he muttered, still in disbelief. But according to the rules, black medallions could nullify any legality in Metropolis. This included the association's rule about fighting people 3 to 4 stages above your own. Thanks, Michael replied casually, as if this was the most normal thing in the world. Meanwhile, everyone was wondering to themselves how and why Michael got the Duchess' approval. Sure, he was extremely talented as a young boy, but that wasn't enough of a reason. The Duchess wasn't supposed to favor a company just because she liked someone's potential. Just then they saw Michael float towards the top of the auction venue. He moved towards the Duchess and gave her back the black medallion. After all, it could only be used once. You're so full of surprises, aren't you? She asked him. It's not a surprise to me, he replied cheekily. Then he floated on over to the VIP suite next to hers. The tinted glass walls moved over to the side and Michael stepped into his own room. Chapter 596. VIP. Everyone had their jaws on the ground as they saw Michael enter one of the VIP rooms. What? But, how does he get a VIP room among the major factions? So that's where he's been the entire time. Bo and the rest of the Rising Six had been wondering why they couldn't contact Michael among the private suites in the auction rooms. They were looking everywhere but failed to find the Reborn Company's room. But as it turned out, they were looking in the wrong direction. Michael was in the VIP section of the venue. As for how he got that privilege, no one knew but Barnaby. He has a VIP room. He got the black medallion. What more is this kid hiding? Michael entered the room with the Dragonborns looking at him with excitement. Bro, Mike, will I get to punch magnetics? He shook his head. Unfortunately, only I can come in the game. Having people who aren't magnetics can be really dangerous. If he tried to force it and say that the Dragonborns were included in his usage of the black medallion, then it probably would have worked. But he knew that they weren't prepared for it at all. So this time he'd be acting alone. All right, Lord Michael. We shall await for your glorious return, Shiina said, bowing towards him. Meanwhile, Barnaby finally shook himself up and forced himself to be professional. He quickly recast his voice amplification spell to get everyone's attention back onto the auction. I apologize for the slight delay, but as you all have witnessed, Michael has now become eligible to join the bidding because of the black medallion. The game shall commence, he announced. The crowd cheered mildly as they were still unable to process the fact that Michael, the boy who had just stepped foot into the realm of the Rising Six, was now fighting against the major factions, all by himself. Unlike his competition, he had no help. While they had 5 magnetics per company, each with a strength of 7th to 9th stage body formation cultivation, Michael was alone with his 4th stage power. Although he had shown himself to be capable of defeating those who were in the 6th stage, given his win over Bo, people were still skeptical if he could stand a chance against experienced and skilled magnetics from the major factions. Please get your players ready, Barnaby commanded, and soon people began walking down the backstage stairs and showing themselves to the crowd. As expected, each of the major factions were using their best fighters for the game. Who do you think would win? I think Alaric will eke out a victory in both games. He's good, but Potbowl is just on a completely different level physically. He's the best fighter here, no doubt. He's trained by a heavenly knight after all. And did you hear? Someone said that the Magic Tower had someone who came from their organization Guild of Arcana. They said that they're using a pupil who is learning to become a mystic master. I think his name is Braxton. Strangely, though, this Braxton fellow was noticeably absent from the Magic Tower's lineup. There's only 4 of them currently on their side. Michael floated down and took his spot on the stage, gathering everyone's attention. He was the odd man out. His feats during this auction had truly surprised them, but they would have never expected that he'd be able to stand on the same stage as them in the end. Barnaby approached him and gave him a suggestion. Hey, why don't you sit the first game out? We both know you don't need to win the automobile. This was a very useful proposal, as it could help him conserve energy for when he truly needed it. The only thing that mattered were the 15 drops of Sue that he could potentially obtain. However, there was a part of him that disagreed. Literally. Don't waste this chance. Spending as much time immersed in an environment of people stronger than you will lead to much greater and faster results. This is the only chance you'll have of facing off against the best of the best. As expected of Harbinger, the only thing on its mind was improvement at the fastest and highest level. It didn't care if it was hard or impossible. But to be honest, he didn't dislike this way of thinking. It's okay. I don't want any special treatments, he replied to Barnaby. Hearing this, the other players couldn't help but look at him with a new sense of respect. It would have been easy to just accept Barnaby's proposal and make it easier on himself. But he didn't. He wanted to be fair. All right. I trust you know what you're doing, Barnaby said, patting Michael on the shoulder for good luck. Just then Michael was approached by Dickie, who was in Bobby's team. Hey Michael. Sup? The two were friendly. Michael was still very grateful to them for teaching him how to coat his drone with Sue. I just gotta say, I'm still incredibly shocked to see you here. I think everyone's talking about you right now. He smiled. I didn't think I'd be here too. If we don't have to fight each other, I think it's a good idea for you to side with our team. We'll be more than happy to welcome you in. Dickie pointed to Bobby and the other 3 players from the Quench Company, who greeted Michael with the same smile as Dickie. Maybe I would take you up on your offer. If having teammates were possible, then that would be his best chance of surviving for as long as possible. Of course, this was only possible if the game they played permitted cooperation. Ahem, Tower Master? It looks like you have 1 less member on your team. The tinted glass on the Magic Tower's VIP suite parted ways to show the presence of the Tower Master. Michael looked up at him and saw a middle-aged man in his late 40s with short pepper hair and a rectangular mustache. He's the Tower Master? He wasn't exactly the image he had in mind when thinking of a sage that spent years locked up in a tower studying magic. Forgive me, Barnaby. Our last member is running a bit late. He's just about to arrive, the Tower Master said apologetically. And just then the door to his VIP suite burst wide open as a young teenage man came strutting in with a carefree smile on his face. Sorry, Uncle Lucius. I slept in, hee. This was Braxton, the supposed genius from the Guild of Arcana training to be the next Mystic Master. He was quite chubby with white wavy hair on top of his head. The Tower Master glared at him sternly. You're not taking this seriously, are you? Braxton shrugged. Sorry, Uncle, but matters of the physical world simply don't interest me. I would rather stay in my room, eat some snacks, and bury my head in books and scrolls. Lucius scoffed. Be honest. You think this is beneath you, right? The young teenager couldn't only nod his head. He was going to be a mystic master in the future after all. Haha. We'll see if you can keep that attitude, Lucius said, smiling as he looked down at Michael. Chapter 597. Pool the flags. Now that we have settled our players, please feast your eyes on our pocket dimension, Barnaby announced. As soon as he said that, the stage split in half and crawled outwards, revealing the enormous pocket dimension down below. From first impressions alone, it seemed like they were going to be playing on a single island surrounded by nothing but endless seas. The objective of the game is simple. Be the last one standing with the flag, and you shall win the automobile bid. So it's a capture the flag game, Michael thought. Now, if he was playing for real, then being by himself would be a major disadvantage. His flag would easily fall under the enemy's onslaught, especially if they ganged up on him. But thankfully he didn't need to win the game. All he had to do was survive for as long as he could without getting eliminated. Harbinger told him that interacting with these strong magnetics would help him increase his strength by a significant margin. True or not, he'd only find out during the game. Here are the rules, Barnaby announced. Each of your teams will be given a flag. It is your duty to keep the flag in your possession while stealing other flags from the other companies. The team that ends up with all flags under their banner will win the game. Michael found this interesting because with the rules of the game, having your flag captured was not an immediate loss for the team or the company. They could have a chance to take back their flag at a later time, given that they weren't eliminated from the game entirely. Just then Dickie approached Michael and tapped him on the shoulders. Hey Michael, we have a little proposition for you, he said. Dickie gestured for him to come closer to their group, and he was surprised to find that it wasn't just Bobby who was waiting for him, but also Aerith and Alaric. All 3 legacy leaders were gathered in the same spot. Michael. Pleasure to meet you again, Alaric greeted. Who would have thought we'd see you here, huh? And here I thought you were just a normal kid back then, Aerith said, putting her hands on her waist. Did Dickie tell you why we requested your presence? Bobby asked. He shook his head. I can explain that, said Alaric. You see, as soon as we found out that the automobiles would be auctioned off this evening, we all decided that we would work together to obtain it for ourselves. We knew that the other 3 organizations from the major factions would want this as well, and as much as I hate to admit it, they're stronger than us. Our chances of winning against them in this bid will be low. But if we band together, we can guarantee our victory. Michael didn't think that even the legacies would have to resort to working together. We decided that we'd share the automobile for ourselves and take turns using them, Aerith added. If you want, we could also help you out. So you want me to join you? Alaric nodded. So did the other 2. Not to offend you, but your chances of winning the automobile are astronomically very low. But if you agree to our partnership, then we'll be willing to lend you the automobiles from time to time. Now this was a very generous offer. And if Michael didn't already own automobiles, then he'd be very thankful for the offer. Kukuku. Take it, Michael. They're allowing you to blend in with their group. Kukuku. Getting stronger will be a lot easier than I thought. Since this game didn't really mean anything to him, he decided to agree to their terms. Sure. It'll be nice to form a team with you guys. The trio legacies were glad to hear it. That's great, Michael. We can finally work together, Dickie said, celebrating. Here's our plan, Alaric said, taking charge. Immediately his 4 teammates and the other magnetics from the legacies teams listened to his words with seriousness. We'll be pooling our flags together and protecting them from being sieged by the other 3 teams. We'll dedicate about 2/3 of our strength to do this to ensure their safety. We have 16 people in total, so 10 people will stay behind. Meanwhile, 6 of us will journey out in search of the other flags. I'm sure that those organizations will not work together like us, so it will be a 6v5 in our favor. Alaric's strategy focused on defense, which was very smart. After all, they would be pooling all of their flags in one location. That was 4 in total, and if someone was able to steal or siege them, then they'd be 2 flags away from victory. Don't worry, we'll stay behind, Dickie assured Michael. You don't have to get out there. Boring. You have to get out there in the action. As much as he wanted to do, as Harbinger said, this wasn't his call. After all, he was just one cog in a very big machine. Don't worry. I think there'll be plenty of action. The other teams won't be able to resist the 4 flags that we'll be protecting. Alaric spent some more time strategizing with his team, forming the vanguard group who would be attacking the other teams, and decided roles for the defensive team. Of course, the 3 leaders of the legacies were part of the vanguard group, as they were the strongest fighters available. Then they were allowed to have 1 fighter each, so the total came to 6 players in the vanguard position. Michael. Alaric looked at him. Your job is simple. If there's anyone that comes close to the flags, you use that power of yours to shoot them. They all saw his powers during the game and knew his capabilities. Now his switch would be perfect in this situation, as he could stop an intruder from taking the flags. However, Alaric and the others knew that he was only in the 4th stage while they were in the 8th stage. The disparity in power would lead his ability to be practically ineffective. His unity beam, on the other hand, was not bound by diva cultivation and could hurt them, so it was still useful in this situation. It's very likely that we won't be able to stay together during our descent into the pocket dimension, so the first thing that I need everyone to do is to find my signal. I will shoot it high up in the air and you'll know that it's me. Gather towards this location. Familiarize yourselves with each other so you can help each other out while trying to get to our rendezvous point. Once Alaric had finished his briefing, Barnaby finally announced to the rest of the crowd to start counting down. The game was about to start. 3, 2, 1. Jump. One by one, the players began to jump into the pocket dimension, with their bodies disappearing as soon as they crossed the threshold. Good luck, Michael. Good luck. He heard Bo and Rena cheering him on from above, giving them a thumbs up before jumping into the game. Chapter 598. Game start. Michael found himself in the middle of a forest with a golden flag staked on the ground right in front of him. The flag had the symbol of Reborn with a simple R letter made out of black ink and gold linings. It was big, being at 10 feet tall, and towered over a normal human easily, so it was easy to spot from very far away. And not only that, but there was some kind of glow within the flag that made it look unnatural within its surroundings, making it stand out even more. Guess you can't hide this thing. You have to protect it. Upon inspecting the flag, he found that it was filled with some kind of magic that allowed it to restore itself to its original state once it was damaged. This way flags wouldn't get destroyed during intense fights for its possession. He quickly put the flag on his back, ensuring its safety. The first thing I need to do is to group up with the legacies. Alaric told them that he would be sending a signal to the skies as soon as he landed on the pocket dimension. Unfortunately, he couldn't see any signals in the sky at all. Did something happen? Either way, without that signal, he wouldn't be able to meet up with the rest of the legacies for now, meaning he had to protect his flag alone. You don't even need to protect the flag. Kukuku. Let the other players come to you. He didn't know why, but Harbinger always seemed to be out for blood. Ignoring his diva, he decided to have a look at his surroundings and assess the situation before moving away from his spot. Of course, this was where his drone came in extremely handy. He reached down his pockets and took out the rectangular block and unfolded its propellers. This was now the time for the upgrade. He closed his eyes and focused on the drone system. Immediately he saw a 3D slightly transparent image of the drone right in front of his very eyes. Each part of the drone could be highlighted to show the possibilities for its upgrade. He manipulated the projection to show the 360-degree camera installed on the very bottom of the frame. Once he did, a window popped up in his vision. Shared vision. This upgrade allows the drone glasses to become more transparent. This will lessen the burden of the software into your consciousness, allowing you to pilot the drone even if you are in your own body. The drone's camera will also experience a huge upgrade. Its image quality will be clear enough to see through disturbances that a diva and an ability will make in reality before they are fully activated. Cost: 2 drops. He immediately purchased the upgrade, and suddenly he saw 2 liquid drops falling into the drone and being absorbed instantly. Then the drone's frame started to morph and change, with nanoparticles starting to grow new parts on the camera to upgrade its features. It wasn't long before the drone's new camera system was in place and ready to use. He opened his eyes and inspected the upgrade. The camera at the bottom was a lot more compact, yet with much clearer quality and more lenses layered through the glasses. Of course, that wasn't just the only thing that had changed. He quickly pushed on the recessed button on the side of the frame, and suddenly a small drawer popped out of the drone's side. It revealed the drone's camera glasses. And this feature was the biggest change. The original glasses were blacked out entirely and had an extremely big surface area that covered almost a quarter of his face. It was more like a visor than spectacles. But now the glasses were a lot slimmer, both in the frame and in the visor. The glass itself was now transparent and was now a lot smaller, resembling modern aviator glasses. He quickly picked it up and put it on his head. Immediately he saw a system window pop up in front of him. Entering shared vision with the drone. As soon as it was done, he suddenly saw an entirely new vision in his mind. He saw what the drone was seeing, and he was seeing his own perspective at the same time. It wasn't a split screen where he saw half of each vision. It also wasn't a pop-up window like a minimap from those video games he played. It was unexplainable in human terms because he could see both visions simultaneously without one interfering with the other. He looked at his own hands and saw himself flexing his fingers. And at the same time, he piloted the drone to fly up right in front of him, performing a few backflips in the meanwhile. He wasn't able to do that back then. Amazing. This is a worthwhile upgrade indeed. Seeing this substantial change made him want to see what more upgrades he could make with the camera. Vision. Camera. Drone vision. Magnetic vision. Magnetic vision. This upgrade allows the drone to scan a target and see through their diva's cultivation and their abilities. Cost: 3 drops. That could be useful, but I don't want to spend my last 3 drops on it for now. Harbinger, what upgrade should I choose? The stealth or the mini drone? Of course, it should be the mini drone. Having another eye in the sky will be extremely useful in this environment. We can hunt more magnetics. He could only shake his head. Where does it get all that confidence? Doesn't it know that his opponents were literally at the top of the body formation realm? It's not so much as hunting them rather than hiding from them. SHH, you don't need to do that. I told you. We have to seek out more powerful people in order to improve. Michael wasn't convinced. Pursuing stealth seemed like the best option for now, given how much the other players knew about the drone already. Not only that, but they presumably had better physical stats than him, so they could more than likely dodge away from a unity gun when they see it. But if the drone was hidden in stealth while it powered up a shot, then he had a better chance of hitting his target. Our unity gun is not enough. Those magnetics may be frauds, but they have cultivated enough to have their bodies and minds sensitive to their surroundings. This utterly confused Michael. So you mean that my unity gun has no effect on them? Why did you even have me go to this game if I'm going to lose anyway? I did not say they had no effect on them. It's just that they are powerful enough to dodge it. What Harbinger was trying to say was that any upgrade he did on the drone wouldn't be enough to lessen the disparity between his and his opponent's strengths. Then what do you want me to do? He asked, exasperated. Kukuku. You have one advantage over all of them. And that is me. I am a real diva, not soulless like those frauds. While they are spending hours, months, years trying to communicate and decipher the signals that their divas are saying, I can just tell it to you. I can teach you a skill. Chapter 599. A step. Chapter 599. A step. Hearing those words from Harbinger definitely interested Michael. A skill? What kind? Cuckoo. It's the kind that can use my power. Ability power. Here. Let me show you. The giant figure of Harbinger moved its 2 mechanical hands. He saw the lights on its veins start to pulsate as if it was ramping up with power. And even though this was his own void in the recesses of his own mind, he felt as if he was in a different world, one that Harbinger controlled. The power that he was emanating was potent enough to make him believe that he was seeing it in real life. Suddenly reality began to warp around Harbinger's wrists. Nanoparticles gathered around the back of his elbows, creating a large rocket ship nozzle. A bright orange light began to emanate from the nozzle before a blue jet stream of fire exploded outwards into a controlled manner. Harbinger's arms became powered like a spaceship. This added thrust allowed reality to wrap even further, as if it was folding up upon itself in an attempt to counteract the massive force coming from Harbinger's arms. Lights pulsated, growing in brightness as the power continued to grow. The shrill sound coming from the hands became higher and higher pitched, as if a beam was about to fire any second. And finally Harbinger took his hands together and ripped the very fabric of space apart. In an instant his body disappeared. Michael looked around before finding Harbinger already behind him. The rockets on the back of its elbows had already powered down and returned to its normal state. He looked up at Harbinger's head, shrouded in a dark fog, surprise written all over his face. I couldn't see that at all. There was no magic involved. He would know. His control over mana and magic was second to none. So he was sure that the sudden teleportation that Harbinger performed was not made through a magic spell or mana in any shape or form. It reminded him of abilities. But strangely it seemed a little bit different from all the other abilities he had seen before. All the obolites he had seen had something to do with a power or an item. And in all cases the strange power or ability power came from the outside, as if the person was throwing it to the real world. That was how it affected reality. But this seemed different. It was as if the ability power was stored inside Harbinger and affected only his own body, allowing his physicality to be altered the same way that reality was altered. That is what we call a quantum step, Harbinger explained. This is what you shall do to stand head and shoulders above others. Michael was very much intrigued. Judging by how fast that movement was, it could very well be the speed he needed to surprise other magnetics. As of now, his only offensive capabilities were the Unity gun and his newly discovered Unity saber. His gun was good, but it needed a lot of time to reload and attack again. However, the Unity saber could be used just like another weapon and could be considered as a devastating power that could hurt even high-leveled magnetics. Okay, how do I do that, Harbinger? He was ready to pick up a pen and paper and start jotting down the notes that Harbinger was about to give him. He was the student while his diva was the teacher. Kukuku. It's easy. You just have to use your ability power on your wrists and pull. His excited face immediately turned downwards. What kind of explanation was that? It's like telling someone to go to the bank without giving them the address. Like I said, just gather your ability power in your hands and use them to tap into the quantum realm. Then just hop right into the tunnel and you're good to go. I don't see what's so hard about that. He sighed. Up to this point Harbinger had been talking to him like a real human that he almost mistook him for being one. He was a diva, which meant that its sense of reality was extremely different from other humans. Harbinger may be a part of himself, but that didn't make him human. I cannot teach you any more than this. You'll have to learn it on your own. He just had to accept that fact. He just had to do trial and error until he found the correct way to do that quantum step or whatever. He then opened his eyes, returning back to reality. Harbinger said to use my ability power and gather it in my wrists. Of course that was easier said than done. He didn't have the mechanical body that Harbinger had. He didn't have the nanoparticles that allowed him to create thrusters on the back of his elbow. He just had a normal human body and he'd just have to adapt to that. He took a deep breath and tried to make contact with the Godforge pieces in his heart. His muscles tensed, his breath stopped, but no matter how much he tried to force the ability power out of his heart, nothing worked. How am I able to use my ability power anyway? Reaching down his pockets, he took out a single switch for him to use. After kicking a tree next to him, leaves suddenly floated out down towards him. And with a flick, the switch attached itself to a falling leaf and completely stopped its momentum. It was now frozen in time. How does my ability power work? He concentrated again, trying to feel the power coming from the Godforge pieces on his heart and onto the switch. There had to be an invisible connection between the two that allowed it to alter reality based on his powers. Again he found no luck. He only felt a vague sensation that made him feel connected with the switch. This time he took out the reverse graphite block from his pockets and threw it down towards the pile of fallen leaves. Suddenly a few leaves began to float up towards the tree, tracing back their original path with their momentum completely reversed. He put his focus on the reverse graphite block, trying to discern a difference between it and the switch. I do feel a slight difference, but it's very hard to point out. It was as if the connection between him and his technology blocks were made out of a cloud that became a lot fuzzier the more he tried to concentrate on it. He spent a good few minutes studying the two, trying to tell them apart. If he wanted to learn how to do that quantum step, then he needed to figure out how ability power worked inside a magnetic's body. It was the key. As he concentrated, he suddenly remembered something. Wait, I could use that. It only just now came to him that the new upgrade for his drone came with a really cool feature. It allowed him to see abilities through a certain lens, making it seem like he was looking through a thermal imaging scan. Chapter 600. String Theory. He deployed his drone and took out the new and upgraded glasses from its drawer. He quickly put them on, allowing him to see the vision of the drone as well as his natural eyes. The drone flew up with him piloting it at the same time that he was moving his own body. And with its 360-degree camera, he finally saw himself. To activate the ability thermal imaging scan, he instinctively knew what to do. He tapped on his glasses 3 times and suddenly an orange tint descended down into his vision. Instantly, the vision he saw from the drone turned into a different reality. The world around him was colored with blue to dark violet hues as if they were lifeless. Because they were the same color, they almost blended into each other apart from some outlines that made him see what they actually were. And as he turned his line of sight towards himself, he saw a bright orange to yellow light emanating from his chest. He was bright hot. His heart in particular was glowing like the sun. Not only that, but there were glowing orange lines coming from his heart and out towards the iron switch and the reverse graphite block. This was the invisible connection they had with each other. So that's ability power. There was a steady stream of ability power coming from his heart and supplying his technological blocks with enough energy to continue its altering of reality. Seeing this now made him extremely happy. He finally saw abilities down to their natural form. He piloted the drone to come closer towards the technological blocks. First, he observed the switch. He saw that the leaf it was attached to was being coated with some kind of orange glowing bubble. This made it easy to identify which objects were affected by an ability. He then went over to the reverse graphite block and saw the same thing. There was a bubble of protection around the leaf, allowing it to be unaffected by the rules of reality. He piloted the drone to really come close to the abilities and see the red hot stream up close and personal. There wasn't a zoom option for the camera on his drone, but he did see that the red hot streams of ability power were made out of some kind of strings. The individual strings were identical to each other and were flowing out with the same speed and trajectory as the others. It wasn't a straight string either. It looked random, as if a single string of yarn was dropped to the floor and made some weird curves and loops on the ground. He then moved towards the other stream of ability power and saw that it was also made out of some kind of glowing orange string. But this time the strings were bent, looped, and knotted in a completely different way than the first one. It didn't take a rocket scientist to conclude that the different strings was probably what allowed each ability to be a different power from each other. So abilities are made up of ability power, or AP. And AP are made up of millions of tiny strings arranged in a specific shape. It was safe to assume that each ability had a specific shape that the strings conformed to. This meant that if he wanted to replicate the quantum leap that Harbinger performed, then he needed to figure out 2 things. First, he needed to figure out the specific shape of string that the quantum leap conformed to. And second, he needed to figure out how to get his Godforge pieces to produce that kind of string in the ability power. It sounded very simple, but he was completely clueless on how to do that. He knew the formula, but he didn't know how the math worked. He closed his eyes again and entered the void in his mind, returning to see Harbinger's gigantic figure towering over him. If I could take my drone here and observe the ability power coming from Harbinger, then I'd be able to solve my first problem. Kukuku. Why are you suddenly acting like you're a scientist? You weren't that good at school. He was a bit offended by that, but it was true. Well, ChatJK4 isn't here right now, so I have to think about this all on my own. If his personal AI assistant was here, he'd just put the burden of thinking on the software. You don't need her. You already have me. He rolled his eyes. You're not really helping though. Kukuku. You don't need to think. You need to feel. As long as it's in your heart, your Godforge pieces will do what you want. You just need to believe. Again, Harbinger's advice were just empty fluff words. It didn't actually help him at all. But since he had nothing else to go on, he decided to believe. He opened his eyes again and concentrated on the Godforge pieces in his heart. This time, a part of his brain was looking at himself from a third-person perspective. It watched the ability power in his heart like a hawk. He tried all sorts of methods to draw out his ability power. He held his breath, he flexed his muscles, and he even meditated. Believe. I have to believe. His mind focused back on the image of Harbinger, creating a warp on the very fabric of reality and disappearing behind him in an instant. A sense of desire formed in his heart. He wanted that. He wanted to do that. And suddenly he saw something move within the glowing sun in his heart. But as soon as he stopped concentrating, the movement ceased and returned to the heart. He concentrated again, replicating the same thoughts and feelings he had that garnered a reaction within the Godforge pieces. Slowly, a thread weaved with millions of tiny strings sprouted out from his heart and began to snake its way through his body. Sweat poured down his forehead as he kept himself at full concentration. Each time his mind wandered, the thread would retract back into his heart. Slowly but surely, the new thread of ability power reached the end of his wrists. This is where Harbinger said to gather my ability power. Now I just have to pull. His fingers started to curl up into a ball as he tried to grab onto the fabric of reality, just the same as Harbinger did. The AP threads on his wrist began to propagate a bubble around his hands, allowing him to change reality around him. Space around his wrists began to warp, slowly folding upon itself, as if there was a black hole near his hands. Its speed and magnitude was nothing like the one that Harbinger did, but it was still the same technique nonetheless. Now I just pull, he said to himself. Taking a deep breath, he pushed out all the ability power in his wrists and used the surge to grab onto the space in front of him. His hands molded the fabric of reality for a brief moment. But suddenly the thread connecting to it suddenly snapped, depowering the ability from going any further. Chapter 601, Thread Snap. Michael looked at his hands, the fleeting power still lingering on the back of his mind. For a brief and momentary second, he felt a tremendous power gathering at his fingertips. It was as if reality itself was behind his will, allowing him to mold it to fit his desires. The feeling behind the quantum step was an extremely different feeling from all of his other obolites. The switch and the reverse block were powerful and affected the world around him. But this ability affected his very hands, as if he had become the power that could transcend reality. And to be honest, it was an intoxicating feeling. Even when he had only achieved a cusp of the true power that the quantum step held, it was still the most powerful technique he had ever performed. He wanted to complete it. How powerful would he feel after he performed it just the way as Harbinger did it? And just like before, he concentrated and willed a thread of AP towards his wrist the second time, a lot easier than the first. Power gathered at his hands, with reality starting to warp around his wrists. Now he just needed to pull at the space in front of him and allow him to step through it. He braced himself, gathering more power at his hands and grabbing the space forcefully. However, the thread snapped in half all the same. Couldn't handle the power. Performing the quantum step felt like trying to jump on a paper floor that could rip apart in any second. If he was careful, then he could slowly tiptoe his way through the paper floor without it ripping. If he wanted to perform the quantum step, then he needed to jump. But to do that, he needed to briefly put an enormous amount of force through his feet to get the necessary lift to jump high up in the air. But the moment he gathered power at his feet, the paper would rip through and he would fall into the abyss. That was what he felt like trying to perform the quantum jump. His threads were just far too thin. What's happening? Why can't I do it? He asked Harbinger. The giant, futuristic mechanical diva looked down at him. My techniques are too powerful for your current state. You do not have enough ability power to properly execute it. This immediately put a damper in his mood. So the solution is that I need to advance more stages in my cultivation. That was the only way to improve a magnetic's ability power. He'd need to find more Godforge pieces in order to transcend to the next stage. But even then, he was slightly skeptical that he'd have enough AP to pull it off. Quantum step was a technique that required a tremendous amount of power. Something he didn't have. You knew that I didn't have enough AP to do it, Harbinger. Why did you even teach me that technique if you knew I wouldn't be able to execute it? Harbinger's eyes shone through the dark fog, showing him a smile. Kukuku. Just because you can't do it now doesn't mean you can't do it later. You will find the answer to your AP problem. He frowned. How? I already told you the answer. You must fight other magnetics. It is only through the heat of the battle will your instincts flare up and give you the answer you need. After hearing Harbinger's non-answer, he was starting to miss ChatJK4's reassuring voice. At least with his AI assistant, he'd be given direct answers and solutions to the problem. Meanwhile, Harbinger just speaks in metaphors and puzzles. Kukuku. Looks like you'll have your chance now. He opened his eyes and left the void in his mind. With his glasses still on his head, he used his 360 drone vision to look at his surroundings. And on the northwest side, he suddenly picked up a disturbance a few tens of meters away from him. The sound of grass being stepped on echoed through to him, alerting him of heavy footsteps. There was someone coming towards him. Using his drone, he surveyed this new stranger. The man wore full metal armor, with his attire bearing a close resemblance to medieval knights from his previous world. He's from the Order of the Heavenly Knights, he realized. Chen? The knight muttered, narrowing his eyes at Michael. After seeing that Michael's face wasn't someone he recognized, and that the boy wasn't wearing metal armor, the knight immediately felt disappointed. He thought he stumbled upon one of his teammates. But then the knight saw something that made his eyes go wide. Just behind Michael was a glowing green flag that was stuck impaled into the ground. That's a flag. You're Michael, the knight realized. There was only one flag bearer in this game, that was a kid with golden hair. The knight couldn't believe his luck. He had just been wandering aimlessly through the forest, but who would have thought that he'd be able to get his team a flag this early in the game? He approached Michael, his hands spread wide to show that he meant no harm. Hey kid. If you give that flag to me nicely, then nobody needs to get hurt. I just want the flag and you can continue with the game. I won't eliminate you. Michael couldn't care less about the flag or the game. But he just couldn't surrender a fight he hadn't even fought yet. Kukuku. That's right. Battle with him head on, Harbinger encouraged. Sorry, can't do that, he replied. This earned him a frown from the knight. Look, there's no one around to help you. I know that you made an alliance with the legacies, but even they can't help you now. With his drone, he already knew that there was no one else around him for a solid few kilometers. Just leave the flag to me, and then I'll let you go and rendezvous with the rest of your team. After that, you can plan to take back the flag from our team. At least then you won't. And just before the knight could finish his sentence, a unity beam shot towards him from behind him. Unbeknownst to him, the drone had already circled around and found his blind spot. But just as the unity beam was going to hit the knight on his back, his body suddenly blurred before he stepped to the side, completely evading the unity gun. Sorry, I already know about your flying weapon and your powerful beam. There's nothing you can do, the knight said, his patience wearing a little thin. Michael took one switch from his pockets and shot his own unity gun towards it. And as he flicked it on, the unity saber was born. Its glow illuminated Michael's face to show the seriousness in his eyes. He was planning on fighting the knight. The knight sighed and took out the red axe from his back. If you insist on making it hard for me, I'll have no choice but to eliminate you, the knight warned. But Michael still kept his hands on his saber, ready to fight. Chapter 602. Thicker. The knight tossed his axe back and forth with his left and right hand casually. The bronze-like sheen of the weapon started to glow as he began to manifest the power of his diva. The space above him started to shimmer as a large lizard-like creature with black scales and red highlights appeared above the knight. It opened its mouth, revealing that a reddish fire was gathering at its throat. It was ready to blow out a flame. He's a lot stronger than Bo. He's probably in the 7th stage of body formation, Michael concluded. Just then, the knight's body suddenly blurred and disappeared from Michael's sight in an instant. He reappeared behind with his axe in hand and ready to slash Michael in half. The axe was brought down with force and gusto, but at the very last moment, a beam of unity shot towards the knight's head, making him abandon his attack and dodge away. This surprised the knight, not expecting Michael to react that fast. Do you have eyes on the back of your head or something? Michael didn't answer. But with his shared drone vision, he practically had a 360-degree vision of his surroundings at all times. He then quickly turned around and lunged at the knight with his unity saber. But the knight just smiled and stepped to the side, turned around, and used the momentum to swing the axe horizontally. His target was Michael's waist, but as the axe swung in its original direction, a wall of water appeared around Michael, slowing down the axe and allowing Michael to air jet backwards just in time. Okay, I'm going to have to use my real strength now, the knight declared. The giant black lizard above his head released a torrential rain of fire towards the axe, making it combust into the same flames it purged out of its body. This wasn't normal fire. It was a fire made with ability power. With his axe lit aflame, the knight began swinging his weapon diagonally with his blade, leaving behind a trail of fire in the air. It was as if anything the axe touched would be endowed with an eternal fire that even a furious wind could not blow out. The knight then lunged at Michael, dragging his axe to the ground and burning all the fallen leaves in his wake. Michael conjured up 20 magic circles around himself. The bodies of magical animals and beasts started to meld and form inside the circle. Each one was imbued with 2 mana that synergized with each other. As soon as the knight came close, the magic animals lunged out of the magic circles. But with a single swing of his axe, the magic animals were split in half. Fire began to grow from the point of contact, quickly beginning to grow and consume the mana inside these creatures. They were torn asunder by the raging flames of the knight's ability. The knight, now unimpeded, brought his axe from behind him and down towards Michael. The fire in the axe's blade seemed to have created an enormous amount of thrust within the weapon, accelerating it with such force and speed that Michael couldn't react to it. Just as the axe was about to cleave through him, his absolute unity defense kicked in and fought against the raging power of the knight's flames. The prismatic shield used unity to try and tear through the weapon's very material. However, its ability flames were fighting through the unity, slowly breaching through its defenses. With the axe blade bearing down on his chest, Michael quickly brought up his unity saber, supporting the prismatic shield. This seemed to have helped a little bit, slowing down the blade to a stop. But undeterred, the knight gritted his teeth and pushed down with his weapon harder. The giant fire-breathing black lizard above him opened its mouth, roaring out an enormous flame. His force and desire translated to a much more powerful ability, and the flames in his weapon grew even hotter, starting to tear through the prismatic shield, even with the support of the unity saber. Michael felt the pressure in his hands, making his arms tremble as he held his sword. Concentrating, he commanded his drone to shoot a unity gun in the knight's direction. However, the knight seemed to be keenly aware of the drone and used his feet to kick up silt from the ground. Upon contact, the cloud of dust suddenly burst into flames. And as they dispersed into the air, it created a wall of flames that protected the knight's back. The unity beam shot towards the flames, but the fire burned through even the destructive power of unity. And unfortunately, the same was happening with Michael's prismatic shield. The knight's blade was slowly inching closer to Michael's chest. His ability is too powerful. Using his drone's ability vision, He saw that the knight's heart was glowing with a much more intense orange glow than his own. Not only that, but the threads that connected the knight's heart to his weapon and ability were a lot girthier than Michael's. Michael's threads were only as thick as a hair, while the knight was as thick as a rope. Michael piloted his drone and launched the switches on the bottom of its frame towards the knight. The iron block stuck to the mithril relic axe. And for a brief second Michael saw his own thread spool out from his heart and connect to the switch. The orange bubble came out of the switch's body and spread outwards to the knight's weapon, trying to get it under its control. However, the knight's thread suddenly grew hotter and brighter, emanating its own protective bubble around the axe and eventually popping the bubble that his switch created. The thread to his switch snapped, making it fall lifeless to the floor. All in all, the effect of his switch only lasted less than a millisecond. He tried it again with his reverse graphite block, but the results ended the same. The knight's ability power threads were far too powerful to affect. This was the difference between a 7th stage and a 4th stage. The disparity was far too much. Surrender, the knight demanded. But on the back of Michael's mind, Harbinger was just egging him on further. Come on, Michael. The axe's edge is just a few centimeters away from his chest. The knight's flames emanating from the axe just barely touched his clothes, but it incinerated it immediately. It won't be long before the blade would plunge into his chest. Is this it? Is there no other way? But just as the axe was about to pierce through his skin, an idea suddenly popped into his head. The knight's ability power was strong. Very strong. It was evidenced by the thick thread that his Godforge pieces created, allowing for millions and millions of strings to be intertwined together and reinforce it with much more power. A stronger thread meant that it could release a much stronger ability. This was exactly what he needed for the quantum step. Chapter 603. I need that. A bold idea surfaced in his mind. What if he took the knight's 7th stage ability power and used it for himself? If his own power couldn't make the quantum step work, then what if he boosted his own with the power he got from someone 3 stages higher than him? He didn't even know how that would work, but the idea sprouted in his mind and couldn't be stopped. He moved without thinking, acting purely on instinct. And with his drone's perspective, his Godforge pieces glowed hotter and hotter as it began to exhibit a kind of strength that he couldn't exhibit before. It was as if the idea brought upon an adrenaline rush in his body, allowing him to push past the current limit of his body. He piloted the drone to move towards the ground, picking up the iron switch and the reverse graphite block on the ground. The 2 technological ability blocks snapped together, and immediately 2 threads of ability power sprung up from his chest and towards the 2 items. His AP converged, creating a bubble that morphed together into one single cohesive unit. The individual strings in the stream of AP clashed together. The curvy form of the switch ability and the jagged zigzag lines of the reverse graphite blocks smashed together, deforming each other until a completely new shape had taken form. The drone picked up this new block with its magnetic frame, sticking it on its underside. He moved closer towards his own body and used the momentum of the drone's flight to fling the conjoined block towards his own chest. It clicked in place in his chest, just a few inches away from the knight's axe. It's not going to save you, the knight declared, using both of his hands to push his mithril relic weapon deeper through the prismatic shield. Its fire burned even hotter, and eventually his weapon's edge finally touched the conjoined technological block. With the knight's 7th stage cultivation, the power from his flames would easily burn through Michael's 4th stage technological blocks. But as he pushed his axe closer towards the conjoined blocks, he felt the power of his flames starting to die out. The more accurate description would be that the effort the knight had to put to push his axe to cleave through the technological blocks became heavier and heavier the more he pushed through it. Sweat started to pour from his forehead, making him frown. His pride wouldn't allow this. The giant black fire-breathing lizard above him roared its mouth, producing more and more fire from its body in an attempt to power through the effort. It was going to slice through the technological blocks one way or another. From the drone's ability vision, the knight's Godforge pieces produced a tremendous amount of AP towards his weapon. There was a constant stream of power pushing through and fueling the fire that was trying to consume everything it touched. However, as soon as the flames touched the conjoined technological block attached to Michael's chest, the flames stopped for a very brief moment. But it was at that moment the flames were starting to get broken down into its individual strings that made up the ability power. Then the individual strings started to unbend their curves. It started to untie its own knots. Slowly but surely the strings were reverting back into a straight line, as if it came straight from the Godforge pieces in the knight's heart, completely unprocessed and unchanged. This was pure ability power. And once it became pure AP, the strings imbued themselves into the very structure of the conjoined technological blocks itself. As soon as Harbinger saw this, his obscured face under a dark fog lit up with a prominent smile. "Coo. You have done it, Michael. Just like I told you we could." Harbinger knew what Michael was doing. He was stealing the knight's ability power and storing it for himself. The knight, unaware that this was happening, started to get more and more exhausted as the seconds passed by. He was heaving as if he had just run a marathon. However, his pride as a knight suddenly reared up, allowing him to summon renewed strength back in his heart. His godforge pieces glowed ever so brighter. By the way of the axe, I will not lose. With the last burst of energy, the knight reared his axe back to the top of his head and brought it down towards Michael. The flames were supplied with a tremendous amount of AP, allowing it to explode into a burst of pure power as soon as it reached Michael's prismatic shield. A shockwave erupted out from the point of impact with the force enough to throw Michael flying through the air and crashing towards the nearest tree. The tree cracked into splinters as Michael's back hit its trunk. Blood spilled from his mouth. With his prismatic shield broken, he felt the full brunt of the force. The knight barely held onto his axe as he tried to catch his breath. He looked at Michael, who seemed to be unconscious and down for the count. "You could have made it easier on both of us if you had just surrendered," the knight muttered under his breath, but the silence of the forest made it heard loud and clear. The green flag representing the Reborn company was lying on the forest floor with dust and soil lying on top of it. The knight picked it up from the ground and inspected his treasure. "Hopefully this is enough to prove my worth," the knight muttered. He turned around about to walk away and return to their base when all of a sudden he heard the sound of trees cracking and splintering. He looked back and saw Michael wiping the blood off his mouth and slowly standing up. "You still haven't given up?" the knight asked, confused and a little bit irritated. "You should know when to stand down." He didn't want to hurt Michael any more than he should, but if he was going to keep fighting like this, then he'd have to resort to using warranted violence. Michael reached down to the ground and picked up the Unity saber from the pile of fallen leaves. As he clicked the on switch, the Unity beam appeared, becoming as long as a normal sword. The knight sighed and rolled the axe in his hands. There was a confident and irritated look on his face, as if he knew that whatever Michael tried to do would only end up being pointless. His training as a knight and his 7th stage cultivation made Michael's move seem as slow as a snail. Michael held the switch of his saber with both hands, pointing the blade towards the knight. His godforge pieces lit up with a thread of ability power slowly spooling towards his wrists. With his hands powered by AP, the space around his wrists started to morph and fold into itself. But this power wasn't enough. He needed more. Suddenly, the conjoined block still attached to his chest released its own thread, shooting towards his wrist. This pure ability power spiraled through the original thread, reinforcing it to form a much thicker strand. Chapter 604, His Specialness. The combination of both strands released a tremendous amount of energy towards his hands. And with more power supplied, reality started to warp with much more intensity around his wrists. The striations around the warping fabric of space became much more evident and was now visible even to the knight himself. The knight narrowed his eyes, wary of the power gathering at Michael's wrists. He was thoroughly clueless, as Michael had never shown this kind of ability during his previous game. He could only assume that Michael had been saving up this type of power for this very moment. And finally, the warping of reality grew to a peak. Almost half of Michael's body was obscured from the warping of space. With his Unity saber held in both hands, Michael thrusted his weapon. As soon as he did, the warping of reality swallowed his whole body. The knight grabbed his axe tightly and planted his foot on the ground, ready for Michael's attack. Whatever it was, he could react to it. But in an instant, Michael's body disappeared. There was no sign of super speed nor magic involved. It was as if he just blinked out of existence. Immediately, the knight was unnerved. He couldn't see or react to where Michael disappeared. Then blood started to drip from his mouth. The knight looked down and saw Michael below him with his Unity saber pierced through his stomach. Confusion filled the knight's mind even before the pain could catch up. And suddenly the knight's body began to shimmer in and out of existence. With the Unity saber burning a hole through the knight's stomach, pocket dimension deemed it too dangerous for him to continue. He was being automatically teleported out of the game. Even as the knight was losing his consciousness, he couldn't understand how Michael was able to teleport right towards him. Even with teleporting magic or super speed, his 7th stage cultivation would have allowed him to see or sense where his opponents would end up. But with this, he was completely unaware. He wasn't able to react. As his vision went black, his unconscious body was teleported right into the stage right in front of the crowd's eyes. Immediately, the discussions from the crowd came to a stop. They looked at the knight with confusion, clearly not expecting him to get eliminated so soon. That guy was from the Order of the Heavenly Knights. How did he get eliminated so fast? Did anyone see him? Who did he fight? It must have been incredibly strong. Probably in the 8th or 9th stage. To defeat someone of his caliber without any one of us seeing it means that the fight must have been over really quickly. All of them were paying attention to the other players in the pocket dimension. Most eyes were directed towards the leaders like Alaric Braxton Potbowl and all the other high-level magnetics, so none were paying attention to a single fighter from the Order. Not only that, but there were plenty of fights that had started within the pocket dimension. Many were currently ongoing, with clashes coming from the legacies versus the organizations. Because of that, no one knew how this could have happened. They could only resort to speculation. Look at his injury. There's a huge hole in his stomach. Barnaby's crew members were already attending to the knight and giving him first care aid, but everyone could see the massive injury in his torso. Therefore, it was easy to conclude that whoever he fought against also used a melee weapon like a sword. This particular detail made the mystery even more complicated. After all, the knights were extremely famous for their impressive swordplay and their mastery over their weapons. If someone was able to defeat them in a one-on-one battle and even beat them in swordplay, then it meant that whoever fought against them was also extremely skilled. Some also correctly guessed that the knight was subject to a surprise attack. It's gotta be from Sinclair's elixir. They're the only ones that are fast enough to pull one over the knights. They're fast, but the knights are way too careful. It's gotta be someone else. The only people who I think can defeat this knight in such a convincing manner are the leaders of the major faction. Michael's name didn't even come up once during their discussions. It didn't even come to their mind that the weakest player on the field was the one who could have defeated the knight. The only one who saw the truth was the person who was looking at Michael the entire time. Of course, it was none other than the Duchess herself. She was quite worried for Michael given his obvious lower cultivation compared to the others. That was why she was keeping an eye on him. And when the knight showed up, she thought it was unlucky that he'd be eliminated so early during the game. But knowing that he didn't need the automobile, she knew that he wouldn't care about the game either way. She only wanted him to be safe. She was ready to shout at Barnaby and have Michael teleported out of the pocket dimension as soon as he suffered any serious injuries. But lo and behold, he not only survived the attack but also defeated the knight in turn. Suffice it to say, she was speechless. And it wasn't just her. Angela Montgomery, the Duchess' personal attendant, had her eyes stuck on Michael with disbelief. That's not possible, she muttered. He shouldn't be able to do that. He's only in the 4th stage of body formation. Her eyes were clear, as if she knew exactly what kind of power Michael had executed. His cultivation shouldn't have been able to do that. He shouldn't have been able to know about it in the first place. Duchess, what am I seeing? She asked, still in disbelief. She wanted others to verify that it wasn't just her who saw that. You're witnessing Michael's specialness, the Duchess answered. He cannot be measured through normal ways. You know, we should have known that by now. Michael kneeled on the ground, exhausted. His unity saber clicked off, falling out of his hands and into the ground. All of his muscles, bones, tendons were completely spent and in peak fatigue. Not only that, but he felt his energy at the lowest. His eyelids were fighting to stay awake, as if he had been staying awake for 2 days straight. Despite this, he couldn't help but smile. He did it. He performed the quantum step. Kukuku. What did I tell you? Fighting with other stronger magnetics will only push you to your limits. Come on. Let's find some more victims. He quickly tried to rein down Harbinger's excitement. Settle down. Can't you see that I don't even have energy to stand up? I need a few minutes. Harbinger could only grumble inside the void in his mind while he tried to catch his breath. He piloted his drone to look at himself, and he saw that the Godforge pieces in his heart were glowing very dimly. The usual red-hot orange glow was gone and was now turned into a cool blue and violet. Chapter 605. Depleted. The quantum step was a powerful technique. So powerful, in fact, that not even a 7th-stage body formation knight could react to it. However, with great power came with an even greater cost. His ability power was almost depleted. At this point, he could probably only use one switch at a time. How do I recover my AP? Just rest, Harbinger advised. Ability power will naturally recover with enough rest. It will probably take you half an hour to return to your peak form. That's not bad, he thought. It would have been extremely bad if he could only recover his AP after a day's rest. Though this was also not ideal. If he became deadbeat tired every time that he used his quantum step, then that meant that he'd be only able to use it as a last resort. A trump card, if you will. That was still good, of course. Knowing that he had a card up his sleeve that would allow him to escape or engage at any time was a good thing to keep his peace of mind. But this would mean that for the majority of the game he'd have to resort to his normal powers. Powers that were completely inadequate in this game. If he could use his quantum leap more freely, then he'd be able to fight against the other players on even ground. It would have lowered the gap between him and the other magnetics in the pocket dimension. With how much AP the quantum leap consumed, that didn't seem possible. What are you talking about? You already invented that thing. Use it. He looked down at his chest and saw the conjoined blocks of the iron switch and the reverse graphite block. This was what allowed him to pull off the impossible. It allowed him to siphon off the 7th stage ability power of the knight and use it to power his quantum leap. During that time, he didn't know what he was doing. He was just simply following the instincts that were born from his idea. But now that he observed it much more closely, he started to understand what he truly created. This was a battery. All ability power was made from millions of strings. And the effects that an ability created were based off of the shape and form unique only to that ability. His switch had a lot of curves. His reverse block had a lot of zigzags, and the knight's flames were made out of many combinations of knots. He had a theory that every AP stored in the Godforge pieces were made out of basic strings with just a single line with no curves or angles. And when a magnetic starts to use them to perform an ability, those basic strings would then be converted into those unique shapes. That was what prevented magnetics from using someone else's ability power to power their own ability. However, he found a workaround for that. Basically, he used his reverse graphite block to replay time back to when those strings were made out of a basic straight line, making them pure ability power. And then his switch paused those AP in one spot, effectively storing power to be used at a later date. That was how his new battery worked. What's great about this was that he wasn't fighting against someone else's ability. If he was, then his technological ability blocks wouldn't work. The knight's 7th stage cultivation would have easily defeated his 4th stage AP blocks. Instead, he was simply redirecting the knight's AP. He wasn't fighting it, so it didn't fight against him. This meant that he would basically be able to siphon out any kind of ability power from any magnetic. It didn't matter if they were in the 7th stage or in the 9th stage. Kukuku. That's why you should start fighting more magnetics. The reason why you feel so fatigued after the quantum leap is because you had to use your own ability power. If you had siphoned off enough AP, then you could have even used it twice and not get tired. Harbinger's bloodthirstiness was starting to rub off on him. He was now starting to think that it was a great idea to just start waving his flag around to attract all the other players into fighting with him. He wanted to fill up as many batteries as he could. After that, he could basically execute Quantum Leap as many times as he could. He was now starting to understand why Harbinger wanted him to play in this game. This pocket dimension was filled with high-leveled magnetics, each one having an enormous amount of ability power just waiting to be siphoned. Kukuku. Now you're speaking my language. He had to calm himself down, saying it was one thing, doing it was another. For him to actually siphon off AP, then he needed to have close contact with a magnetics ability. This meant that he'd basically have to put his life on the line every time he wanted to charge his battery, which wasn't ideal. Is there any other way? As he was in deep thought, the sound of the drone's propellers continued to buzz near his ears. He turned his head around, looking at his own drone. Then an idea struck his head. What if I use my drone? He could be far away from the fight and only have his drone approach the battle. Then, equipped with the battery on its frame, he would pilot it to get as close to the abilities as possible, siphoning off their energy. Of course, this would put his drone in danger, but since it was made out of pure mithril, he was sure that it could take a few hits without even incurring a scratch. The more he thought about it, the more excited he became. That's not all. If I purchased the mini drone upgrade, then I could potentially charge 2 batteries at once. He was sure of his answer now more than ever. Back then he was debating on whether to get the mini drone plus Unity gun MK2 upgrade versus the muffled propellers plus invisible frame. But now his thoughts have changed. Now he was planning on getting the mini drone and the invisibility option, costing 1 and 2 drops respectively. This would allow him to charge 2 batteries and still be stealthy and approach battles without other people knowing that it was even there. He'd be able to charge his drones unbeknownst to anyone. But because of his budget, he couldn't upgrade it to full stealth. The propellers still created a buzzing sound that could be heard even from far away. Still, even if other people could hear his drone from far away, they wouldn't be able to know its exact location unless they spent a lot of time searching for it. And since he'd only be targeting people who were already embroiled in tough battles, they would be hard-pressed to have the time to find where the buzzing sound was coming from. Wasting no time, he immediately pulled up the drone's upgrade window and started purchasing what he wanted. A few seconds later, nanoparticles emerged out of the drone's frame and began forming its new upgrades. Chapter 606. Batteries. A large clump of nanoparticles started to form above the drone's frame. It formed a rectangular frame which bore a close similarity to that of the drone's body, but a lot smaller and a lot simpler. He could hear the sounds of millions of metallic clicking from the nanoparticles as they worked on the mini drone's frame. As soon as they finished building the foundational structure of the mini drone, the nanoparticles swarmed onto its sides to start creating its propellers. Amazingly, he saw a solid structure made out of mithril after the nanoparticles were done with it. As the mini drone's construction was underway, the drone itself was also being swarmed by nanoparticles. They were working on changing the very surface of the drone, changing it to accommodate the technology that allowed it to become invisible. It looked like a hive of mechanical bees had made their homes on the drone's surface. About half an hour later, the upgrades were finished and the nanoparticles sunk back down into the frame of the drone. A lot had changed with his drone. First of all, the miniature drone was perched on top of the frame. This was where it was going to be placed naturally, seeing as there was a dedicated landing space for it. This made the drone a little bulky, but it didn't matter. The mini drone's body was about half the size of the drone and only had 2 propellers instead of 4. Of course, the mini drone also lacked the 2 Unity gun barrels on the side of the drone, as well as the cannon barrel on the bottom for the Unity grenade. The only thing that the mini drone had was the 360-degree view camera at the bottom of its frame. This would allow him to also see the mini-drone's perspective at the same time as his eyes and his main drone. As for his main drone, its main frame now had these hexagonal shapes stamped all around its surface area. These looked like screens that would be able to reflect the light and allow it to look invisible. Thankfully, the invisibility upgrade also included the mini-drone with its frame also having those hexagonal shapes. It's time to try it out. He had also recovered his AP to its full capacity while he waited for the upgrade. Standing up, he picked up the glasses from the drone and entered its shared vision. Immediately, 3 separate perspectives entered his mind. It disoriented him a little bit as he wasn't used to processing this much visual information at the same time. But after a few moments, he slowly got used to it. Next, he piloted the 2 drones to fly up and face towards him. This was the easy part, of course. The hard part would be to control all 2 drones with great proficiency while also moving his own body. And as expected, he had a little bit of trouble simultaneously controlling all 3. It was awkward. It's the same feeling as brushing your teeth with your left hand instead of your right hand. It took some getting used to before he could properly say that he piloted them. There were a lot of crashing drones in the trees. But thankfully, it didn't take long before he had a basic mastery over the 2 drones. Anyway, in most scenarios, I would only have to control the 2 drones while I keep my body safe in a different location. Next, he wanted to see the capabilities of his invisibility upgrade. With a single thought, the hexagonal shapes on the drone's frames began to change color. One by one, the hexagonal blocks began to adapt to the color of whatever was behind them. If the propeller was in front of a bunch of leaves, the hexagonal shapes would copy its image exactly. And it seemed like it didn't matter which way people looked at the drone. It would adapt to whatever their perspective was, effectively making them invisible to everyone. If someone looks at it hard enough, they can see the outline of the drone, he realized. But that was only if they put in the effort to look. And if they didn't even know that the drone was in the vicinity, they would never find it. As of now, this was a good way to keep his drone at stealth. Of course, with its noisy propellers, it couldn't be helped that people would eventually be notified of its presence. He just have to keep his drones at a respectable distance and only swoop in once he was sure that he could siphon a large amount of AP from the fight. That was his tactic to charge the batteries. By the way, Harbinger, how much ability power does the quantum step need for it to be activated? This much, I guess. In the void of his mind, he saw Harbinger raise his hands and gesture with his fingers as if he was measuring a fish instead. Michael shook his head in disappointment. ChatJK4. I miss you. Harbinger wasn't ChatJK4 and couldn't give him a direct answer. Looks like he had to figure this out all on his own. Sigh. Okay, let's say that I had about 200 AP in my Godforge pieces during that time. And the AP that I siphoned from the night would be about 400 AP. And since I almost emptied out my AP, it's safe to say that the quantum step would need 600 AP. Of course, those were just arbitrary numbers since he didn't have a definite way of measuring AP yet. He'd have to ask for ChatJK4's help later once it finished its software update. And with each battery, I think I can store about 2000 AP. That would mean that a 100% charged battery would give him 3 uses of Quantum Leap. And if he had 2 batteries, he could potentially have 6 uses in total, which wasn't bad at all. If he put himself into the equation as well, then he could charge as many batteries as he wanted. Though the risk would exponentially increase for him. Now that he knew the capabilities of the battery, he began his preparation. First, he created more iron switches and reverse graphite blocks from the ground. Thankfully, this pocket dimension had plenty of that. He made sure to make extras in his pocket just in case. Then he started to attach the switches and the reverse blocks together, creating the batteries. He attached a battery to each of the drone and it fit snugly near the bottom of the frame. Now that he was prepared, he had to think about what to do next. Should I just stay still and hide here? He looked at the skies and still saw no sign of the supposed signal that Alaric would give them. Maybe I should start walking around. Cuckoo. You know that's the best option, Harbinger advised. After thinking about it some more, he decided that it wasn't a bad idea to start surveying his surroundings a little bit. He piloted the drones to fly off in different directions as he tried to find any sort of activity in the area. Chapter 607. Drone Surveillance. Using his drone and his mini-drone, he found himself fully aware of his surroundings. The amount of information he got from 3 different perspectives allowed him to cover more ground in a short amount of time. Of course, he used his drone's ability vision, seeing things through an orange and violet world. Those that were bright red indicated ability power, and those with a cool violet indicate its absence. Because of this, finding other people was a lot easier. It wasn't long before his main drone saw a large clashing of orange glow in the distance. Judging from the explosions of AP going around in the area, it was easy to guess that there was a battle currently ongoing in the distance. He and his mini-drone quickly changed directions and followed the main drone towards them, hoping to find someone he was familiar with. Using his supreme skill, he peered through the dense forestry and saw 2 different light mana signatures in the distance. They weren't someone he was familiar with, that's for sure. Once his drones were about a half a kilometer away from the commotion, their hexagonal stamps started to change color, adapting and reflecting the light around them. And because he was wary of them hearing his drones, he made sure to keep a respectable distance away from them, just enough for him to get a closer look at what was happening. Once he was near, he changed his drone's vision to the normal setting, allowing him to see what they looked like. On the left side was a man in a similar full steel armor, indicative of his allegiance to the Order. Meanwhile, opposite him was a woman who wore a black robe and a scrunched-up, pointed hat on her head. She was definitely a wizard from the Magic Tower. Both fighters looked to have been battling for quite some time, evidenced by the scuff marks around their bodies, as well as the chaos and destruction around them. Trees were incinerated, craters were made, and a lot more damage was done to the environment. The knight had his sword raised up in the air with a rock golem diva hovering above him. The mage, on the other hand, had a magical feline with monocles as her diva. They're not from any of the legacies. This meant that they weren't his allies. This made him a lot hesitant in approaching them. Should I leave them alone? No, you have to charge your batteries. Harbinger immediately interjected. This time Harbinger was right. For him to feel confident in walking around the pocket dimension full of magnetics 3 to 4 stages above him, he needed to have at least one charge for his quantum step. This looks to be a good first practice to see if my drones work. He saw that the glowing intensity of their ability power was just the same as the knight he had fought earlier, meaning that they were probably in the 7th stage of body formation. This would be the perfect time to charge his batteries. So with determination, he slowly piloted his drones to move closer to the fight. The knight lunged at the wizard with his sword, having bits of soil and rock attached to the edge. The mage, seeing this, casted a magic circle and created a slimy surface in her feet to slide away to safety. The sword just barely missed the mage's robe, hitting the tree behind her instead. As soon as the knight's sword touched the tree's bark, a bumpy and rocky surface suddenly emerged from the point of contact. It began to spread around the tree like a virus, effectively turning everything, its roots, leaves, and its bark, into stone. With his attack missed, the knight kicked his foot onto the now rocky tree, using it as a platform to change his trajectory and chase after the woman. The knight sped forth with the rocky tree behind him crumbling under the pressure. The mage raised her wand in the air with the magical feline above her wagging its tail accordingly. A ball of a mysterious blue liquid appeared at the tip of her wand, powered by the Godforge pieces in her heart. She casted the ball towards the chasing knight, hitting the patch of grass in front of him. Immediately the grass changed into the same color as the blue liquid. As soon as the knight stepped onto this patch of grass, his feet slid off forward uncontrollably, making him fall backwards. Michael watched this with his drones watching behind them. He figured out their abilities after just one exchange. The knight's ability allows him to turn everything into a brittle rock. The mage's ability allows her to create a slippery surface with zero friction whatsoever. Wanting to siphon AP, he moved his drone closer to the crumbled tree that became a rock. Once he was just a meter away from it, he saw the strings that made up the knight's ability. It was jaggedy and formed a rough outline of a boulder. And even though the knight was far away from this rock tree, there was still a thread connecting him towards it. He moved his main drone closer, putting it in between the rock tree and the thread connecting it back to the knight. He piloted it perfectly to coincide the thread to the battery attached to the drone's frame. And just like that, the ability power that was being supplied to the rock tree was siphoned away by the battery. 0.1%, 0.2%, 0.3%. That's kinda slow, he muttered. For him to be able to use his quantum step without using his own AP, then he needed at least 30% of the battery filled. At this speed, it would take him 30 minutes to fill it up to that amount. It's because he isn't putting in any active effort to pump AP into this rock tree, he realized. When he fought against the knight, he was purposefully using his ability power to burn through his defenses. There was a constant flow that allowed him to basically supercharge his battery in just a few seconds. So if he wanted to supercharge his batteries, then he needed to get his drones in front of the battle. Though of course at that near distance they would be bound to find his drone. I could stay here and siphon off the slippery grass and the rock tree. That would be the safe option. They definitely wouldn't find out about his drone if he did. But he was a little bit impatient. He wanted to charge his batteries as fast as possible. Trying to think up a solution, the knight and the mage continued to have their battle, throwing their abilities around to try and outdo each other. And then he noticed something with the drone's ability vision. At the very moment that their ability would land towards an object and start to affect its reality, there was a large surge of AP coming from their Godforge pieces. If he could somehow get his drone in direct line of sight of the attack, he could siphon off all those ability powers. Chapter 608. Charging batteries. Of course, that was easier said than done. There were a lot of factors he needed to consider. First, he needed to maneuver his drones just barely touching the edge of the ability's area of effect. Basically, he only needed the battery on the bottom of its frame to be in direct line of sight from the AP threads coming from their Godforge pieces. That was a very slim margin. Too far and he wouldn't be able to charge his batteries. and too close his drones would get caught up in the attack and possibly reveal their presence to the two magnetics. And second, he needed to have perfect timing or else he'd miss entirely. When an ability was cast and was attached to reality, there was a brief moment when the Godforge pieces would supply it with tons of AP to start spreading the effect onto the other parts of reality. For example, when the knight used his sword to turn the tree into stone, his ability power usage spiked up as the bumpy rock effect started to spread throughout the entirety of the tree. Only once it had been fully turned into a rock did the knight's Godforge pieces start to lower its release of AP. That was also a slim margin, lasting only for a second or few. Well, it's time for me to test out if it's even possible. He piloted both drones and assigned them to a target. The main drone for the knight and the mini drone for the mage. And because he had to keep at least 100-meter distance away from them to lessen the noise of his propellers, he needed to start flying his drones at the moment that he saw them start to use their abilities. After waiting a few seconds, he found his move. The mage casted another ball of a mysterious blue liquid at the tip of her wand. And as soon as she was about to throw it towards the knight, he moved his mini drone to dive down towards the ability as fast as possible. The ball splashed onto the patch of grass just a few inches away from the knight's feet. The mage's Godforge pieces started to supply more AP towards the ball, increasing the thickness of the thread by at least 3 times. Because of this, the zero friction effect of her ability started to spread from its original splash all the way towards a 2-meter diameter around it. The knight was now wary of the attack and was able to dodge away and rush at the mage as a counterattack. Meanwhile, thanks to the heat of the battle, both didn't notice the sound of his mini-drone's propellers swooping down towards the growing patch of blue grass. As soon as he saw that his mini-drone had dived down deep enough, he quickly maneuvered it upwards, allowing him to just barely graze through the thread of ability power. 1%, 3%, 5%. Just as it reached 5%, the mage's Godforge pieces stopped supplying enormous amounts of AP. Immediately, he piloted the mini-drone to escape out of the two's earshot. Once he was sure that his propellers couldn't be heard, he turned back. It worked. He inwardly rejoiced. Even though he had only spent less than a second basking his battery onto the ability thread, it had already gone up to 5%. And his timing wasn't even perfect. He had pulled up way too early and only had about half of the battery submerged through the ability power. Not only that, but he missed basically about 2/3 of the peak timing for the surge of AP. If he had done it perfectly, then he had no doubt that it would have already gone up to 10%. After seeing this result, he focused his attention on his main drone. The knight rushed at the mage, who was casting normal water magic to slow him down. He slashed through all obstacles, magic or natural. Thanks to his training as a knight, his speed was incomparable against the mage. She was only surviving due to the numerous magical obstacles she could conjure in between them. Finally, the knight caught up with the mage, having her within distance of his sword. He performed 2 consecutive slashes, diagonally forming an X shape in front of him. Then bumpy rocks emerged in the air, forming the same shape as the knight's slices. The knight retracted his sword back, rearing it up before he lunged it towards the center of the X, launching it towards the mage. Unable to dodge, the mage was hit in the chest with the rocky X shape, pinning her on a tree. Suddenly, the rocks began to spread all around her, and the tree aiming to encase her in a tomb of stone. It was at this moment that Michael had his main drone swoop down to the tree, stopping his descent just at the moment when the battery made contact with the surge of ability power. 1%, 3%, 6%. It topped out at 6%, which was better than the one he had with the mini-drone. Immediately, he piloted the main drone to fly up and away from the fight. This can work, he thought with a smile. Even if he could only get 5% every time, it would only take him 5 more attempts before he could charge the batteries to 30%, which was enough for 1 quantum step. Just then, the stone tomb encasing the mage suddenly exploded out as she was finally able to break free from the imprisonment. The mystical professor-like cat diva above her snarled at the knight, angry for what it had done. He inwardly breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that his plans wouldn't work if she was defeated so fast. Please fight each other until I get 30, okay? The mage, furious, casted 10 balls of ice in front of her, each one only as small as a grape. She touched each of them with her wand, imbuing it with her ability. Then she commanded the ice balls towards the knight. They sped through the air at unbelievable speed, almost as fast as a bullet. With those ice balls imbued with the zero friction ability, they could accelerate almost infinitely. The knight was caught off guard and could only bring up his sword frantically. He sliced through one ice ball, which didn't get cut and only slipped past the edges. The other shot towards his armor, dinking it in a couple of places. Michael had trouble keeping up with the ice balls, but he was able to get at least a few percentages of charge from them. If he wasn't careful, then he could have charged a lot more. But that would risk jeopardizing the whole situation. He would rather play it slow and keep siphoning ability power through many attempts. And so, as the mage and the knight continued to throw 7th stage abilities to one another, there were 2 drones stealing their AP unbeknownst to them. As the minutes passed by, Michael kept charging his battery. It wasn't long before he had 33% battery on his mini drone and 34% battery on his main drone. Chapter 609, Two Shots. After gathering this much charge on his batteries, he immediately piloted the drones to come back to him. Although things had gone well these past few minutes, it didn't mean that they weren't going to notice it in the future. It was best to gather all of his charges first before he continued on. He took out his own battery and attached it to his chest, which would now serve as his personal bank for ability power. Once the drones were right in front of him, he took out the batteries underneath their frame and attached it to the battery on his chest. As soon as they clicked together, the ability power stored in those batteries started to transfer over to his battery. It wasn't long before the two were drained back to zero, while the battery on his chest surpassed half of its peak charge. He now had 67% battery charge ready to use whenever. This was enough for him to get 2 quantum steps without having to dip into his own ability power. Having this battery attached to my chest reminds me of a famous comic book hero. It was kind of fitting given that his diva also worked with technology. He also had the Unity gun, which bore a similarity to the energy beams that character was famous for. It would have been perfect if he named ChatJK4 as Jarvis. Anyway, he returned the empty batteries to the drones and got them ready for another harvest. Of course, he was going to continue siphoning off AP for as long as possible. In fact, he wanted the two to fight for the remainder of the game so that he could charge as many batteries as he could ever possibly want. However, that wasn't likely. The mage was starting to lose too much energy compared to the knight. This outcome was very predictable, as melee versus magic would always end up in the victory of the swordsman. Mages were better if they had enough distance or enough protection against melee fighters. In his opinion, the mage would only last a couple of more clashes before the knight would be able to deal the final blow, which was bad for his battery charging mission. He had half a mind to start interfering with their battles. He could help out the mage by using his Unity gun to shoot at the knight through his drone, injuring him and leveling the field. But that would lead to his drones getting discovered and in turn him getting discovered. Everyone knew he owned this flying weapon. So he decided to be safe rather than sorry. He would let the mage get defeated and only siphon off as much as he could in the meanwhile. He piloted the drones to hover 100 meters above the two, waiting patiently for the next timing. His numerous attempts at this allowed him to get better and better until he could masterfully maneuver both drones to charge at the same time. The mage, panting and trying to catch her breath, looked haggard and had lots of cuts around her robe. Her whole feet up to her shin were encrusted in rocks, making her unable to flee. Opposite her was the knight, who was also a little bit tired but looked a lot better than his counterpart. He raised his sword ready to lunge at her. But just as he was about to unleash his last ability attack, they suddenly heard an echoing voice from up above. 2 candlesticks have passed. Players, it is time to reveal the positions of the flag in the pocket dimension. Barnaby announced. An hour after the game started, different colored beams started to shine down from the skies. Those were in fact where all the flag bearers were located in real time. This was a feature of the game that would ensure that the players wouldn't simply just hide their flags in the pocket dimension and call it quits. Unfortunately, Michael was no exception. A large beam of green light illuminated him with an intense brightness, making him squint to see his surroundings. The beam only lasted 3 seconds before subsiding to the skies and returning everything back to normal. For most, this was a good clue that they'd use to track down other flags. And for flag bearers, this was a warning to them to start running away from their original position to ensure that they wouldn't get caught by the other players. But for Michael, the situation was completely different. He wasn't hiding in a secluded spot. He was just a few hundred meters away from the knight and the mage, who were now looking directly at him and spotting the glowing green flag on his back. Immediately, the knight burst forth towards him with renewed vigor. The knight's sword slashed away at any obstacles, turning them into bulky rocks and smashing them into pieces. The mage seemed to have regained some of her energy too. The adrenaline of seeing a flag just a small distance away from her allowed her to temporarily break past her limits. She waved her wand, conjuring a blue ball and shooting it on the ground. Suddenly, a blue path of zero friction appeared right in front of her, allowing her to skid through the forest floor with ease and with speed, nearly catching up to the knight. With those 2 magnetics bearing down on him, he could only curse his luck. I didn't know this game had that kind of feature," he complained. He saw the knight's Godforge pieces start to glow with intense brightness, turning it from a mild orange to a red-hot neon. The knight was using a power he hadn't used in his fight with the mage. And it seemed that it was the same for the mage as well. She was conjuring as many icy blue balls around her and shooting it towards him. They traveled through the air frictionless and continued to gain more and more velocity until they surpassed the speed of a bullet. They both knew that Michael had no chance to escape. His 4th stage cultivation would not be enough to dodge their 7th stage abilities. Whoever eliminated him now would get the honor of obtaining the flag. Michael stood there holding a switch in his hands and activating his Unity saber. 2 people. 2 shots, he muttered under his breath. The only way to escape this predicament was to eliminate them both, which meant that he had to execute the quantum step simultaneously. He can't give them any chance to react to his attack. The knight then finally released his attack, creating a large crescent of rock that shot towards him at the same time as the mage's icy blue balls. With those two abilities coming at him, he moved. The battery in his chest unclicked its switch, releasing the energy it had stored in its body. A thick thread of AP shot towards his hands, powering it with a large surge of power. His wrist began to bend the very fabric of space, getting more and more powerful as the thread got thicker. But just as he was about to activate his quantum step, he suddenly heard footsteps coming towards his direction. Chapter 610. Keep up. With his drones surveying his surroundings with a 360-degree camera, he briefly saw multiple figures rushing in his direction. He clicked his tongue, thinking that he was going to have to fight those people as well. But as he got a closer look at their faces, he realized that he recognized them. They were none other than the legacies themselves. Alaric, Aerith, and Bobby. There were 6 of them in total, but those 3 were running ahead of everybody and were just milliseconds away from reaching Michael. As soon as the knight and the mage saw the 3 legacies, their eyes showed immediate fear. The knight stabbed his sword in the ground, skidding in the mud and halting his momentum. And without even thinking, he dashed away from them in an instant. The mage, on the other hand, released her ability and removed the frictionless surface on the ground. And using her magic, she summoned a gust of water that propelled her away from the 3 legacies. However, that didn't seem to be enough, as Alaric, Bobby, and Aerith seemingly teleported behind them in an instant. Bobby raised his hammer and brought it down upon the knight, crushing him to the ground. If the Pocket Dimensions' auto-teleporting feature wasn't in place, the knight would have been squished to death. Alaric raised his hand, and a chain hidden underneath his sleeve shot towards the mage. It quickly wrapped around her torso and arms, compressing her with enough force to make her utter her surrender. She was teleported out of the game with her ribs already cracked. The 3 legacies stopped running after ensuring the elimination. That's 1 less from the Order and the Magic Tower, Alaric muttered. It's even now. They also got 2 from our teams, Bobby replied. It's not even. We also lost 1, Aerith sighed, remembering Michael. When they arrived, they saw that the knight and the mage had already shot their abilities towards him. Even with their strengths, they wouldn't be able to catch up to save Michael in time. So assuming that Michael would be eliminated, they instead went to avenge his defeat. Let's get his flag, she muttered. But as she turned around, she couldn't help but freeze in place. She stood there confused and shocked at what she was seeing. Michael was kneeling on the ground, still in the game and not eliminated. What? How did he survive? Bobby blurted out. Even the famous Alaric Goldstone was speechless. From all of his calculations and his estimations, Michael shouldn't have been able to dodge from those attacks, much less come out of it unharmed. Yet there he was with no sign of injury in his body, just a few mud marks on his clothes. How? He could only mutter out. Michael got up from the ground, swatting the dirt from his clothes. He could only smile innocently at them and refused to elaborate. After all, at the very last second, he activated his quantum step and dodged out of the undodgeable 7th stage ability attacks from the knight and mage. In the end, he was forced to use up 30% of the energy in his battery, leaving him with only 37%. Still, he would have had to use all of his energy to fight off the mage and the knight, so all in all, he was thankful that the legacies arrived just in time. I'm glad you guys are here, he said, greeting them. How did you guys know I was in trouble? The 3 legacies just looked at him, still unable to get rid of that lingering question on their minds. How did he survive that? Bobby was the first one to wake from his stupor. He was not the type to think deeply, so he just accepted that Michael was not eliminated and didn't ask for any more explanations. We saw the beam of light, Bobby explained. Those signals could be seen all around the pocket dimension. And when they saw the green color, they knew that it had to be Michael's flag. We rushed here as fast as we could, knowing that the other players were now aware of your position, Alaric further said. And since your cultivation is below that of everyone, we knew you couldn't outrun any other player. But what I didn't expect is that you would be able to dodge their attack. Michael shrugged. I don't know. All I saw was a blur, he lied. This seemed to be enough of an explanation for Alaric, as he nodded in understanding. They must have lost their concentration when we attacked and accidentally veered their attacks off course. Michael inwardly heaved a sigh of relief. He didn't want anyone knowing his quantum step just yet. But it was good to know that even they weren't able to pick up on it as well. Where are the others? They're back at the base. Didn't you see the signal? Asked Alaric. This signal must have happened during his fight against the knight. That was how he missed it. It doesn't matter now. You're here with us and we can keep you and the flag safe, Aerith said, giving him a reassuring smile. I guess I'm lucky that you guys were near. We were actually out trying to hunt for the other flags, Bobby said. Us 6 are the ones in charge of offense during the game. Michael remembered that Alaric's plan was to have 10 players protecting the flag while 6 players would capture flags. A few seconds later, the other 3 members of their squad finally caught up with them. They saluted at their leaders and greeted Michael. He realized that all 3 of them were in the 8th stage of body formation while Alaric and the others were in the 9th stage. They're finally here. We should move, Alaric advised. Other players could still track us since this is the last known location of the flag. Michael will have these three escort you back to the base. This would be the safest option. Kukuku. Don't go, Michael. Keep close to them. And this time he was actually agreeing with Harbinger. I think it would be more dangerous for all of us if we separate, so why don't I just come with you guys? He suggested. The three legacies looked at him surprised that he would ask that. We'd be fighting against other magnetics, you know? It'll be bloody, Aerith said wearily. Although being part of the strike team involved a lot of danger, he actually preferred this situation. He was surrounded by 8th and 9th stage magnetics, all of whom were his allies. If someone were to attack, then they'd be able to assure his own safety. All the while he was secretly siphoning off their ability power on the sidelines. He could only imagine how much power he could get from their Godforge pieces. With their cultivation it must be a lot. And with only enough battery charge left for one quantum step, he was feeling quite hungry. You're right, Alaric agreed after giving it some more thought. You guys could get ambushed on the way back to the base. It's much safer if you come with us. The question is, can you keep up? Chapter 6:11, Wizard's Base. Michael and the group set off and continued onwards with Alaric leading the way. And much to their surprise, he showed that he was more than able to keep up with their speeds. As long as it was just pure velocity, he could always use his magic. At least in that regard, he was definitely much better than them. Of course, following them behind were his two drones. He made sure to be extra careful and leave a lot of distance between them and the group. And while he was running with this group, Michael saw that their bodies were glowing with ability power, even though they didn't seem like they were using their ability. It permeated their bodies with small threads coming out of their Godforge pieces and acting as a kind of new vein system that supplied not blood but ability power. If he wanted to, he could even charge his batteries with the passive AP that they were giving off. With their 9th stage cultivation, even just a tiny dip into their powers would give him at least 5% charge. Of course, that would be way too risky. Not bad, these guys. They are starting to understand how to truly use the powers of their diva. But that's to be expected since they're already in the 9th stage. Do you think I'll be able to learn it like them? Kukuku, with me it'll be a piece of cake. Maybe I could ask them how to do it instead, he said, half joking and half serious. You'll learn nothing from them. Their divas are mere empty shells. For a second he thought he heard a sympathetic tone coming from Harbinger. You keep talking about that and saying that their divas are empty shells. What does that mean? Is it just because they can't talk unlike you? After this question, Harbinger just stayed silent, refusing to answer any more questions. He would have wanted to pry more, but Alaric's voice caught his attention. We're getting near, he said, signaling to everyone to slow down and lay low. Where are we going? He asked them, completely clueless. Aerith moved closer towards his ear and whispered, we're tracking down the base of those wizards. As it turned out, their first order of business was to steal the flag of the magic tower. And judging from their speedy work and voiceless communication, it seemed like they had been planning this from the start. There's 6 of us, Alaric stated, not including Michael for obvious reasons. And since we defeated one of their mages, there's only going to be 4 of them left protecting their flag. Basically, they were using their numerical advantage over the other teams. All 6 of them would work together to dismantle the other 3 teams one by one, getting their flags in the process. It was a divide and conquer type of strategy, which seemed to be the very best option given the circumstances. It's even more likely that there's only 3 of them protecting the flag, Bobby added. I've heard that Prodigy doesn't play well with others. Prodigy? Braxton Higgs, the genius of the Guild of Arcana. He's hailed to be one of the next mystic masters in the future, Bobby answered. He was one of the very few people that we have to worry about, warned Alaric. From what I've gathered, he's also in the 9th stage of body formation. Because of his talent in both diva cultivation as well as the mystic arts, he has freedom to do whatever he wants. He probably won't be staying at their base protecting the flag. That wouldn't be fun for someone like him, which is good for us. He was quite interested to see this Braxton fellow. There were a lot of things he could learn from the guy. Specifically, he wanted to know how he could combine magic spells and abilities together. So if all goes well, we can find the flag in their base easily, Aerith assured. They continued onwards with Alaric raising his right hand and letting out the chain from underneath his sleeve. It weaved through the fabric and out in the open, pointing straight into a specific direction. Alaric would then follow this path, knowing that it would lead him to where he wanted. Eventually they reached a seemingly normal place in the forest, no mountain, no river, and with no standout features whatsoever, just plain trees. That's their base, Alaric declared. Everyone looked around but saw no sign of those wizards anywhere. However, they knew that Alaric's chain would never lead them wrong. Alaric confidently walked through to the forest, and suddenly his entire body disappeared, as if he stepped into another dimension. The others followed suit, with Michael not far behind. It's a nice illusion, he remarked. And using his drone vision, he saw that there was a huge rectangular wall of magic and mana right in front of him. Now normally he would have spotted this enormous use of magic immediately. He would have seen it from a mile away. However, he noticed that there was an ability imbued within the very magic spell itself. It allowed mana to be hidden from view. Of course, if he had peered a little closer, he would have seen them immediately. He stepped inside the illusion and suddenly saw a completely different scenery. There were skyscrapers made out of stacked books all around this region of the pocket dimension. Even the skies had been freed from any clouds, letting them see through the starry night in the skies. But however much interesting this base, that the wizards made for themselves, none of it compared to the small item right in the very middle of this book city. A glowing blue flag stood valiantly in an empty clearing. This was none other than the Magic Tower's very own flag. This was what they were here for in the first place. But of course Alaric and the others reigned in their excitement. Even though the flag was right in front of their grasp, they didn't believe for a second that there wasn't any kind of defense mechanism around to protect it. "Is that the real flag?" Aerith asked, suspicious. "That's the real thing. You can't fake that," declared Alaric. "But where are the mages that were supposed to protect the flag? They wouldn't have left them alone like this," Bobby said, echoing Aerith's suspicion. "Everyone stayed where they were, wary of a trap that they might set off. This is for sure a trap, but we need that flag. We'll just deal with them when they come. Michael, you stay there with your flag, and the other three will protect you," Alaric said, nodding at the 3 8th stage magnetics beside Michael. They nodded back to Alaric and turned away from Michael, making sure that no one could ambush him. Alaric, Aerith, and Bobby walked towards the blue flag carefully. But even as they got extremely close to the blue flag, there still weren't any traps that sprung up from anywhere. It truly looked like they abandoned the blue flag, thinking no one would find their base. Meanwhile, Michael used this chance to survey his surroundings with his drones. Just then he saw 3 bright orange glows hiding behind the book skyscrapers. Chapter 6:12, Blue Flag. "Watch out," he shouted. Immediately Alaric, Aerith, and Bobby looked around until they saw 3 figures running straight at them. Judging from the black robes they wore as well as the pointed hat on their heads, it was easy to guess that they were the 3 wizards from the Magic Tower. "They're here," Alaric blurted out with shock written all over his face. He wasn't surprised by the fact that the wizards had sprung a trap on them. He was surprised that he wasn't the first one to notice their presence. Michael had somehow seen them first, even though he was far away on the edge of the wizard's base. As 9th stage magnetics, they thought that they had the best sensitivity when it came to abilities. Yet if it wasn't for Michael's warning, then the trap could have worked on them. They would have been ambushed and immediately start the fight at a disadvantage. But because of his timely warning, Alaric and others were able to assess the danger and act accordingly. Alaric lunged at the flag and took possession of it in an instant. This was his main priority. Meanwhile, Aerith and Bobby faced the 3 wizards with their mithril relic weapons at the ready. Bobby swung his giant hammer to the side, creating a gust of wind. At the same time, his Godforge pieces activated and powered his hammer with ability power. The air seemed to get compressed with a tremendous amount of pressure. And suddenly a large shockwave propagated out and blew the 2 wizards hurling towards the skyscraper books behind them. Aerith, on the other hand, took out a tiny sewing needle from her waist and held it in between her fingers. She flicked the needle towards the wizard in front of her, with the invisible ability power thread of her Godforge pieces still connected to the needle itself. Her weapon seemed to fly through the air unconventionally, not following the rules of physics. It swerved and curved with purpose, as if Aerith was controlling it with her ability power. The mage raised her wand, casting a magic circle that conjured up a thick cloud of sand intended to slow the needle down. But despite this, Aerith just smiled. As soon as the microscopical sand particle touched the needle, it seemed to experience a molecular change as her ability started to take effect. Thousands upon thousands of tiny frogs spawned from the cloud of sand, each one born from the particles that made direct contact with Aerith's needle. The frogs landed on the ground, blinking their eyes like a normal animal. But a second later, they all turned towards the mage and stuck out their tongues, extending a few feet before reaching the mage's clothes. Black spots appeared on the mage's skin, which slowly spread around her body. Not only that, but her previously pristine skin started to become wrinkly like that of an old person. Unable to take on the progressing disease spreading around her body, the mage fell to the ground unconscious. And just like that, the 3 mages were disposed of quite easily. Michael could only stand there and look surprised at their show of power. "I didn't even get a chance to charge my batteries," he lamented. Still, this was still good because he was able to get a glimpse of their power. Bobby's ability seemed to allow him to change the pressure of any object with his hammer. When he swung that giant weapon, which was the size of a normal person, the air that it touched started to get squeezed together. And knowing modern physics, he knew that its temperature and energy would also increase as well. And once the air could no longer get compressed together, Bobby released all the pressure, creating a powerful air shockwave that shook the ground itself. As for Aerith, her ability seemed to allow her to conjure up magical frogs from any object that her needle touched. Then those frogs could somehow infect objects or people with some kind of disease that would rapidly age their bodies. So this is a 9th stage magnetic, he inwardly praised. They were fighting against 3 8th stage magnetics as well, yet they defeated them like they were nothing. Wait, why aren't they getting teleported out the game? Even though they were unconscious, the three mages remained in the pocket dimension. Look closely at their bodies, Michael. Upon Harbinger's request, he moved his two drones to take a closer look at the unconscious bodies of the mages. And as he gazed at their chests, he finally saw what was wrong. There weren't any Godforge pieces on their hearts. It was empty. The red-hot, glowing part of their bodies were completely gone. What replaced it was a ball of ability power mimicking the shape of the Godforge pieces. And once he was closer, he was finally able to see that their bodies were entirely made out of a magic spell. They weren't humans. They were puppet constructs. He had to give the wizards the credit. They were able to make a puppet that looked exactly the same as a human with the same light mana that a person would have. And add in a concealing type of ability, it made it near impossible for anyone to suspect that they weren't humans. Something's wrong, Alaric muttered, noticing the weirdness of the situation. Can't be this easy. And just like Alaric thought, the unconscious bodies of the three mages started to levitate off the ground. Their arms and their legs started to move in unnatural ways, bending opposite of their normal range of motion. And at that moment, a giant magic circle appeared in the sky, occupying the whole base. Suddenly, a cylindrical wall emerged from the ground and rose to the top, enclosing them inside. As soon as Alaric saw this, he gritted his teeth. We've been had. They trapped us here. Why would they do that? Why would they leave their flag and trap us? Aerith asked, with her words tapering off as she slowly realized the situation. They're going for our base. They lured us here with their flag. And while we're busy trying to get out of this place, they'll be heading on over to our base to get all of our flags. It's a 3-for-1 deal, Alaric muttered. Suddenly, more and more magic circles suddenly appeared on the surface of the skyscraper books. Then a faceless human jumped out of the magic circle with its body emanating with the power of magic and ability at the same time. It wasn't long before the rest of the faceless humans jumped out of the magic circles, numbering in the low thousands. There was now an army of homunculus bearing down on them from all sides. Harbinger, can I use my quantum step to get out of this enclosure? You can. But why would you? Don't you see this is your opportunity? All of those homunculi have to be fueled by something. In fact, every single thing here is powered by something. He looked around, scanning his surroundings with his drone vision until he saw small threads coming from the giant magic circle up above. Chapter 613. Fast Charge. According to Alaric, the mages were now probably on their way to their base to siege it and take their 3 flags. This meant that they were probably tens of kilometers away from this place at the very least. Yet somehow the 3 puppet mages were able to move and get resurrected without their caster being anywhere near here. Even these thousands of homunculi only spawned after they were enclosed in this space. This could only mean that the mages who set this up in the first place were still powering them with their own abilities from far away. They were pumping out their AP, concentrating on it to keep it active and alive. That was how the 3 mages looked like. They were impervious to attacks, seemingly invulnerable to any damage. In other words, those 3 mages were getting fed with a constant stream of AP with no breaks. This wasn't the passive thread from normal abilities. This was an active thread. It was as if the perfect timing that he had been trying to do the last time was extended to the entire duration of the fight. As long as he attached his drone to the magic circle on top, he could siphon off those ability powers directly. He immediately piloted both of his drones to fly straight up into the skies, wasting no moment. As soon as he reached the giant magic circle, he saw that there was a collection of threads pooling at the very center and spreading out all around the wizard's base. I wish I had a bigger battery. If he had, then he would have been able to gather all of these delicious ability powers for himself. However, he was limited by the size of his switch and his reverse graphite block, which combined was only as big as his palm. He piloted both drones to move to the very top where all the threads of AP were gathered together. And carefully he maneuvered his drone to push the battery as deep into this collection of ability power streams as far as possible. He dipped the entirety of the battery into the collection of AP, allowing him to intersect hundreds of threads at the same time. His eyes widened as he saw the charge for his battery go up tick by tick. 5%, 10%, 15%. It was already 15% on both batteries. That was already enough charge for one quantum step. However, because he was siphoning off a lot of AP from the 3 puppet mages and the homunculi, they became a lot weaker than they were supposed to. 1,000 homunculi rushed towards Bobby like they were bloodthirsty zombies. Each of them were imbued with magic, shooting off basic spells towards him. But due to how many there were, their powers added up into something almost ground-shattering. Bobby raised his giant hammer, swinging it in front of him. The first line of homunculi felt themselves get squished down into a flat paste. Their fleshy bodies tried to meld and reform together into a full homunculus, but an oppressing pressure left by Bobby's ability kept them pinned down, unable to reform their bodies. Bobby's 9th stage cultivation showed its power. He was able to suppress the abilities in the homunculi, given that its caster was only in the 8th stage of body formation. He was easily able to destroy hundreds of them with each swing, easily whittling down their numbers. But then he noticed that even those that he hadn't yet struck with his hammer were turning into a flesh paste. Unbeknownst to him, these were just homunculi that had lost their AP due to Michael's siphoning. Meanwhile, Aerith used her needle to pierce through as many homunculi as she could. And just like with Bobby, her 9th stage ability was able to overpower the homunculi, turning them into her own frogs. These frogs stuck out their tongue to the other homunculi, imbuing them with a disease. "They're defeating those homunculi too fast," Michael complained. By siphoning off energy, he was making it a lot easier for the legacies to wipe out the homunculi. And with less homunculi, the faster he was siphoning energy off of the magic circle, which in turn leads to more homunculi getting destroyed. 30%, 35%, 40%. But as soon as he got up to 40%, all the homunculi on the ground started to malfunction. They shivered uncontrollably before falling into the ground and dissipating into pure mana. Even the 3 puppet mages had their movements turn sluggish. Motes of mana began evaporating off their bodies, as if there wasn't enough ability power in their body to keep the mana in their body intact. The giant magic circle in the sky started phasing in and out of existence before finally disappearing into nothingness. The giant wall that enclosed them was no more, which was a cause for celebration for others, but a sad moment for Michael. I wish it would have lasted a lot longer. In such a short amount of time, he got a combined total of 80% charge on his batteries. "It's over," Aerith said, taking a deep breath. "We should head over to our base now. They're probably invading it as we speak," Bobby suggested. Alaric nodded and was about to agree when all of a sudden he felt the chain on his body start to vibrate. Something was coming, and suddenly 7 blobs of light appeared above them. Hi. These mini sun-like objects grew eyes and a wide mouth, giggling as they eyed the people below. Alaric narrowed his eyes, realized that these didn't come from the same mages that had trapped them here. This was different. It was stronger. This must be a remnant of Braxton's spell. Then the 7 blobs of light disappeared in a blur. "Take cover," Alaric warned the others before using his own chain to protect himself from the blinding assault. All 7 of them had a smiling blob of light coming for them at near instantaneous speeds. Aerith and Bobby used their weapons before using their abilities as a defensive mechanism. The other 3 8th stage magnetics that were protecting Michael released their attacks in the air, trying to weaken the force. And without a second later, a blinding light permeated throughout the wizard's base, turning everything white. A couple of seconds later, the light subsided. Alaric was unharmed, with his chain floating like a snake around him. However, the forestry around him was completely devastated, only leaving behind bare soil. Aerith and Bobby were in a similar position. Everything around them was destroyed except for the patch of grass underneath their feet. As for the 3 bodyguards protecting Michael, they were in a worse position. The majority of their clothes were scorched and their bodies had burn marks all over. Unlike the 3 legacies, they weren't able to withstand the power of the of light, which was to be expected since it seemed to have been a remnant of Braxton's power. But amidst the 3 injured magnetics, Michael stood in place with only a few burn marks on his body. As surprising as it was, he remained unscathed as well. Chapter 6:14, Back to Base. At the moment that the blob of light appeared, Michael didn't think of it as an attack on him. No, it was an opportunity given to him to charge his batteries. So when the blob of light crashed through his prismatic shield, he immediately looked through the individual strings of its ability power and manipulated it for his own gain. He looked down at the battery on his chest and saw that it had gone up from the original 37% to 47%. And added with the 80% charge he got from the 2 drones, then he had a total of 127% battery, enough for 4 quantum steps. "I'm lucky these guys softened the blow," he blurted out with an awkward chuckle. Even before they asked, he already explained that the 3 8th stage magnetics beside him were the ones who absorbed most of the damage. This seemed to be enough for Bobby, as he immediately took his words as the truth. "Well, they did their job all right. It's good that you weren't hurt too bad." Aerith was still a little bit shocked and was still a bit skeptical about accepting his answer, but she steeled herself and went on over to their 3 injured allies. She used her needle, turning 3 fallen leaves into frogs. These frogs then used their tongues to lick the wounds of the injured, magically healing them in an instant. Aside from giving diseases to anyone the frogs touched, it seemed that Aerith's ability also allowed her to heal people. And as she was hearing these injuries, she couldn't help but notice that a part of Braxton's 9th stage ability power remained on their bodies, burning them indefinitely. If it weren't for her own ability fighting off this remnant, then their condition would have worsened tremendously over the next couple of seconds. Although they were 8th stage magnetics, Braxton was still able to injure them so easily with a remnant of his power. This made her all the more wonder how Michael was able to come out of that attack unscathed. He was only in the 4th stage. Even a small graze from a 9th stage attack should have given him a critical injury at the very least. Yet he was the one less injured among them all. Alaric was also speechless as he tried to think up of any other explanation as to how Michael once again escaped from a near-grave injury. However, he knew that he couldn't linger on this question for too long because they had to keep moving. They're probably attacking our base as we speak. Michael, I think you should hold on to this. Alaric handed Michael the blue flag of the magic tower. Since he was already holding a flag anyway, it would only make sense that he held that one as well. That way they could protect him and the flags at the same time. Let's go, Alaric said, running off into the distance. Aerith and Bobby ran off with him. Michael and his 3 allies protecting him set off not long after. He made sure to act as if he couldn't catch up with them and was lagging behind. But in truth, he just wanted to retrieve the charged batteries from his drones. Once he discreetly obtained them, he immediately poured the charge onto his personal battery. This time he had to use a second power bank, with one containing 100% and the other 27%. Following Alaric's lead, they ran for half an hour before they eventually heard the sound of an explosion echoing out in front of them. Even without his drones, he saw signs of fights everywhere. Trees were getting blown into a million splinters, rocks were exploding out into the air, and all kinds of abilities were flying through the air. They already got here before us, Alaric muttered, gritting his teeth. The whole forest, which was usually colored a cool violet, was now brimming with orange and red glows as players released their abilities at each other. It was a cornucopia of charges just waiting to be siphoned. Oh no, they teamed up as well. Aerith uttered in shock. The Legacy's team, which used to consist of 10 magnetics, was now reduced to a mere 2 members. Opposite them was a combination of knights and mages numbering 6 members in total, all working together to steal the 3 flags under the Legacy's belt. Even though the knights and the mages had an unspoken rivalry that lasted throughout the ages, it seemed that they had to team up today to bring down the Legacies. But it wasn't necessarily their numbers' advantage that allowed them to change the tides of battle so easily. With his drone vision, he could see that among the knights and the mages there was one person there that emanated a glow so bright that he almost felt like he was looking at the sun. The man had a thin and lanky build with minimal armor equipped. His most noticeable feature was his bald head with a burn mark going across his forehead. This guy looked like a monk in training, not a knight. Potbowl, Alaric muttered under his breath with a smile on his face. I've been waiting to clash with him. You guys fight the others, I'll deal with Potbowl. Immediately Alaric's body blurred and disappeared in front of everyone's eyes. And before the other knights and mages could even react, there was a long chain shooting towards their leader. And without even reacting, Potbowl raised his huge and heavy battle axe with a casual swing, repelling the chain coming after his neck. The other knights and mages saw Alaric in the distance and charged in his direction, knowing that he was the one they had to look out for. Aerith and Bobby knew what they had to do. They charged and intercepted the 5 magnetics, preventing them from getting anywhere near Alaric. With no other people around them, Alaric and Potbowl faced each other, both sizing each other up. Meanwhile, Michael met up with the 2 remaining members of the Legacy's alliance. Michael, you survived. Dickie shouted, greeting him with a huge hug of relief. It's good you survived too. Looks like you were almost taken out. Dickie nodded and sighed. We didn't think that the knights and mages would work together. And most of all, that guy. He pointed at Potbowl with fear in his eyes. That guy's a beast. He's the one who whittled down our numbers until there were 2 of us left. Michael looked at Alaric and Potbowl facing each other. They didn't move. They just stared as if waiting for something. But thank God Alaric and the others are back, Dickie said, heaving a sigh of relief. Alaric's the only one who could defeat that guy. Meanwhile, the entire auction crowd had their eyes glued on the pocket dimension. This was one of their most awaited moments in the game. Alaric versus Potbowl. 2 of the strongest magnetics of the entirety of Metropolis. Many arguments were made about who was the strongest between them. And now that question would be answered. Wait, Michael is still in the game. People began to realize. Chapter 6:15. Strongest in Metropolis. Many thought Michael wouldn't last a few minutes in the game. But now he had outlasted almost half of the players. He's teaming up with the Legacies. That's good. Look, they already have 5 flags. The Legacies just need 2 more before they win. It really comes down to who wins, Alaric or Potbowl. Alaric raised his hand with his ring glowing with a violet hue. This was his mithril relic, and one that was just a few scratches away from being considered as a mithril artifact. It was one of the best weapons to get in terms of their purity in the Olden Age. The chain slithered through his sleeve and floated out in the open, wrapping around him like a protective snake. As Alaric gathered the ability power in his weapons, his diva began to manifest. The air above his head shimmered, showing the projection of a majestic black butterfly, whose wings looked to be made out of glass. The intricate pattern around it showed circular patterns, some concentric and some converging towards each other. Opposite him, Potbowl raised his hand and pointed the giant battle axe at his opponent. And just like Alaric, Potbowl gathered the ability power in his hands and began to manifest the diva hidden inside him. The image of a giant tree, one that looked to be taller than any mountain in the world. Its roots were numerous, extending down deep into the very crevices of the land. As for its branches, it was upturned with leaves numbering in the millions. Finally, a worthy opponent Potbowl said, waving his battle axe. You will be a good measure to see how my training has done me well. Likewise Alaric nodded. Suddenly Potbowl's body disappeared. And in an instant he was already right in front of Alaric with his axe swinging from the side and intending to cleave him in half. But at the same time Alaric's chain whipped forward, hitting the battle axe away from him. The collision of two ninth-stage powers created a shockwave that permeated throughout the whole base. Just the wind itself almost knocked a few people over. Even Michael's drones were knocked off their course. Damn, Dickie cursed. Even though there's only 2 stages away from me, why do I feel like the gap between us is like heaven and earth? I'm gonna get injured just being near their fight. Michael couldn't help but agree. The amount of AP that they released during that one singular clash without using their main ability was so strong that it charged his batteries by 0.1% already. Both of them were in the peak of the body formation realm. And he was not delusional enough to think that he could ever stand a chance against one of them in his current state. Sure, he could probably escape with his quantum step, but that would only last as long as he had enough charge. As for injuring them, that was a pipe dream. The gap was simply way too big. Kukuku? Is that what you think? Harbinger's voice had a condescending tone. It was the kind of tone one would have if someone bragged about having 1,000,000 gold coins while having 1,000,000,000 stashed around. He closed his eyes and entered the void in his mind, seeing Harbinger face to face. Like I told you, they're pretty strong in their own right, but we are in a whole different realm altogether. Saying that you can't even stand a chance against them is an insult to me and to you. Yeah, sure. In the future, I guess, he answered reluctantly. Unlike Harbinger, he just couldn't see a possible way he could withstand even a single clash against them at all. Kukuku. You think quantum step is the only thing that I can teach you? His eyes widened and his body immediately perked up. Are you saying that you're going to teach me a new technique? His excitement was off the charts, so much so that he couldn't help but smile in real life. That's right. Quantum step was meant purely for movement, for agility. But as you can tell, speed can only get you so far. What I'm going to be teaching you is meant for offense. Pure destruction. I shall show you now the potential we have. Harbinger raised his hands with the circuit veins in its arms starting to pulsate with power. And just like with quantum step, the fabric of space around his hands started to warp and twist. But this time Harbinger held his hands together as if he was gripping a sword. Michael's eyes widened as he felt the power from Harbinger's hands start to multiply. As soon as his hands were brought together, the force grew so much that the space around his hands started to glow with a bright orange light. The fabric of space was being molded so fast that they were clashing against each other, creating an orange light similar to the accretion disk of a black hole. And even in this void of space, Michael could feel air blowing in his face. Harbinger then raised his hand, bringing with him the accretion disk brought on by the warping of space. And with a simple move, he brought down his hands with force and precision, flinging the force he gathered in his hands outwards. As the force traveled through the air, the fabric of space reached its limits and began to rip apart in half. The ripping of space combined with the momentum of Harbinger's swing created a crescent shape of destruction that seemed to destroy the very reality of anything it touched. And with the power that Michael could sense from this crescent, he felt that it could even break through the very limits of this void in his mind. Snap! Harbinger snapped his hands and made the crescent of destruction disappear in an instant. This technique is called the quantum slash. Michael stared in the endless void of space, unable to get rid of the impression that the swing had on him. The power that it held was unlike anything he had ever seen. No kind of magic or spell could come close to the destruction that it possessed. After all, it was destroying the very fabric of space itself, something that everything and anything was residing in. Not only that, but as far as he could tell, it followed the same principle as the quantum step. It wasn't just an ability, it was something more. Instead of changing reality around him like a normal ability, this changed the reality of his body, allowing him to destroy the fabric of space. That was awesome. Kukuku, of course. But even with this demonstration, Michael didn't get his hopes up just yet. There's just one problem. How much charge do I need to do that? The quantum slash was like quantum step, turned up to 11. The AP usage was definitely not something he could conjure up on his own. He wouldn't even try it. Now that I have a good measure of your batteries, I can safely say that you need 3 fully charged batteries to perform this move. Chapter 6:16. Need more charge. Hearing that number was a splash of cold water on his face. 3 fully charged batteries? He had just barely filled up 1. What are you complaining about? Needing more power is good. This just means that the technique is that much stronger. That was true. However, it wouldn't matter if he couldn't use it in the first place. That was the equivalent of 10 quantum steps. Kukuku. There's a reason why I taught you this technique now. It's only in this situation where you can get 3 fully charged batteries quickly. Michael opened his eyes and saw Alaric and Potbowl still clashing against each other. Their moves were so fast that all he could see was a blur around their bodies. The only reason why he knew that they were clashing their weapons against each other was because of the loud metal clashing sound echoing off multiple times in a single second, followed by sparks that exploded out around them like fireworks. Each of their clashes brought about heavy winds and bursts of AP exploding outwards. Kukukuku. That's how you get 3 fully charged batteries. Harbinger laughed. Now that he thought about it some more, Harbinger was making a lot of sense. Alaric and Potbowl were at the peak of their cultivation. They were considered the strongest magnetics in Metropolis, which meant that they were the best power sources he was ever going to meet. If he could siphon off even a fraction of their power, then charging his batteries would be like pouring water into a glass. Of course, easier said than done. His problem was that he wasn't sure if he could sneak his drones in between their fight. They were moving so fast that it was just borderline on the speed of his reaction time. He wasn't sure if he could maneuver his drones like he did the other times. It was more than possible that he could accidentally bring his drones directly in the line of fire instead of just on the edge of them, causing his drones to get caught in the crossfire. Even though he was confident that his drones could take the damage, he was pretty sure that they would notice his drones at that point. It's worth the risk, he assessed. But first I need to understand their abilities. He could only move once he got a better grasp of their powers. So he dedicated all 3 of his eyes towards their fight, making sure not to miss any details. Alaric and Potbowl clashed again, creating a large explosion that flung both of them backwards. Just then Alaric's chain extended from his sleeve, shooting towards Potbowl at speeds similar to a bullet. Potbowl seemed aware of this and used his battle axe to deflect the chain away from his body, causing the chain to pierce through a tree. Meanwhile, knowing that his chain was out of commission, Potbowl took this chance and rushed towards Alaric. He raised his axe and swung at him wide. But just then Alaric's black butterfly diva flapped its wings, creating the tiniest gust of wind. Potbowl suddenly heard the sound of wood creaking beside him. He turned around and saw a tree falling perfectly into his direction. Even though he was a 9th stage magnetic, Potbowl seemed deeply suspicious of this tree. He quickly changed the direction of his swing to whack the tree away from him. But as his axe's blade clashed with the bark of a tree, sparks suddenly flew away from the point of contact. Somehow the tree was able to withstand the power of Potbowl's battle axe. And as he was struggling to push the tree away from him, Alaric's chain suddenly came from behind and shot towards his body. Potbowl was forced to retrieve his weapon and jump away into safety. Watching all of this unfold, Michael couldn't believe his eyes. That's Alaric's ability. Back in their first clash, when Potbowl deflected the chain away from him, leading it to pierce into a tree, most people would think that it was just a normal miss from Alaric. But with his drone vision, Michael saw something completely different. At the moment that the chain pierced through the tree, Alaric's Godforge pieces released a surge of ability power that traveled through the chain and into the tree. The tree became imbued with a tremendous amount of AP. Not only that, but the piercing of the chain caused the tree to fall to its side, hitting the tree right next to it. And at the moment of contact, the AP imbued in the falling tree was transferred over to the tree next to it. Following that momentum, this new tree also had its trunk split in half and caused it to fall to its side as well. The trees continued to fall like dominoes, and each time the ability power would be transferred over to the latest one on the line. And then finally the last tree fell directly into Potbowl at the moment that he was about to hit Alaric, forcing him to move out of the way. That had to be more than a coincidence. There was no way that a single tree falling would cause it to create a domino effect that would eventually end up in Alaric's favor. This was his ability, Michael realized. His ability is a chain reaction. And beside him, Dickie couldn't help but envy Alaric for his powerful ability. That power of his is very troublesome. You never know where it's going to come. Sometimes he just flicks a rock and suddenly a giant boulder would come towards you a couple of seconds later. This was how Alaric gained his title to be one of, if not the strongest magnetic in Metropolis. Every move of his would always end up in his favor. And even if it didn't seem possible, the world itself would change to make it possible. That was his ability. As long as he started the chain reaction, it would continue on as he pleased. It was the perfect offense. But Potbowl is no slouch himself. He's one of the few that can defend against Alaric's offense. Alaric shot his chain towards Potbowl, which was once again deflected by the battle axe. The chain hit the pile of rocks on the ground, causing them to explode outwards. One of the stones traveled through the air towards the ongoing fight between Aerith Bobby and the rest of the knights and wizards. One of the wizards had casted a lightning arrow that was aimed at Aerith. But then the stone hit it from its side, changing its direction and now coming straight towards Potbowl's head. Not only that, but the stone had also transferred the ability power that Alaric imbued onto it, causing it to have the same power as a 9th stage ability. With the lightning arrow coming at him at near instantaneous speeds, Potbowl closed his eyes and manifested his diva. The giant tree stood firm and tall above his head. It was unmovable and unshakable even in the face of time itself. The lightning arrow finally hit his head. But instead of piercing through it, the arrow simply bounced back and fell into the ground. Chapter 6, 17 9th Stage Charge. Chapter 617. Ninth Stage Charge. Potbowl opened his eyes with not even a scratch on his temple. A ninth stage ability hit him dead on, yet he didn't suffer a single injury. This was his ability. He was invulnerable. That's his ability? That's way too overpowered. What kind of ability does he have? Michael asked Dickie. Potball's ability is purely defensive. From what I know, he can make himself invulnerable for a very short amount of time. Literally unkillable. It only lasts for a moment, but with proper timing and skill it could be used to make himself completely invincible. After being hit with the lightning arrow, Potball's body turned normal with no ethereal glow surrounding him. This meant that Potball's invincibility had worn off and he wouldn't be able to use it again in a few seconds. Knowing that this was the only timing he had, Alaric immediately used his chain and shot its end towards Potball. With no invincibility, Potball's body blurred and disappeared tens of meters backwards, rendering Alaric's attack useless. That kid is pretty good. His ability is focused on defense, so he himself has sharpened his offense to a tremendous level. He may be the most skilled fighter in this pocket dimension. This compliment from Harbinger meant a lot. Since Potbowl was a main student from Kruger, a Heavenly Knight, this meant that his skills were probably honed to be near the level of perfection. He could see how Potbowl was thought of to be one of the best fighters in all of Metropolis. If he was able to perfect his weapon and truly make his offense as good as his defense, then he'd be an unstoppable machine. Okay, so I know both of their abilities. It's time for me to try and siphon off some of their powers. He maneuvered his two drones above Alaric and Potbowl, making sure to keep his distance. Harbinger, any advice? Kukuku. They'll be far too focused on their own fight to notice your drones. Just make sure to not get in their way, and they won't be able to see you. It looked like Potbowl and Alaric were at the same level, meaning that if they lost their focus for even a little bit, then it could lead the other person to gain an advantage that couldn't be reclaimed. They had to focus on only each other, which was good for Michael. Alaric shot his chain, whipping it around him like a lasso. With its length, it was able to break 10 trees in half in a single swing. These trees started to crash down into the ground, knocking down the trees beyond them. Potbowl narrowed his eyes as he saw this. He didn't know which tree would lead to a chain reaction that would hit him and which tree was a normal one. This was one of the hardest things to figure out when fighting against Alaric. No one ever knew where they were coming. Haha, I bet Alaric will win this for us, Dickie said with enthusiasm. Potbowl will have a hard time figuring out the timing to use his invincibility if he doesn't know where they will come. Even the crowd watching this from above couldn't help but praise Alaric for his abilities. I really think Alaric's ability is a direct counter to Potball's incredible defense. Even with Potball's training from a Heavenly Knight, he wouldn't be able to see where the attack would come from. I wouldn't want to be fighting there. With Alaric's ability, even the other players around them aren't safe. Who's to say that his chain reaction ability wouldn't accidentally hit them? Meanwhile, Michael used his main drone and looked at the fallen trees. And unlike others, he had his ability vision, allowing him to see AP like he had a thermal camera. Immediately, he spotted the real chain reaction. The tree on the very right was the one that Alaric passed down his AP to. And this tree had fallen down and passed its chain reaction to a single leaf, which floated to the floor and eventually hit the ground. This burst of AP slowly seeped into the soil, reaching down to a loose rock underground. This rock, now disturbed, fell deeper into the ground and caused the ground to collapse and create an unexpected sinkhole. While all of this was happening, Potbowl didn't waste any time and attacked Alaric. He used his battle axe, swinging it with enormous speed and force. Alaric tried to keep up with his chains, using them to deflect the force, but his power was slowly giving out due to Potball's sheer physicality. Not only that, but Potball's techniques and well-placed attacks allowed him to see through Alaric's weakness. Slowly, Potbowl was able to make Alaric back down step by step, eventually leading him to lean on a tree. Completing his moveset, Potbowl swung his battle axe upwards and caused Alaric's chain to hit the tree's bark and become lodged there, leaving Alaric vulnerable. And just as Potbowl was going to swing his weapon to finish the fight, the chain reaction finally finished. The ground underneath Potball's feet descended into the ground, making him lose his footing. Not only that, but as he fell backwards, Potbowl didn't know that there was a tree's root poking out of the ground. He was unable to notice it and pierced through the very edge of his right shoulder, injuring him for the first time. Seeing this from up above, the crowd went wild. See, Alaric's going to win this. Wow, he's actually able to injure Potbowl. It only goes to show that he's not really invincible. But wait, look, Alaric's chain reaction is causing the entire forest to sink. Grasps rang out as the ground on the pocket dimension started to shake with a 8.0 magnitude. Every single one of the players lost their balance as the ground underneath their feet sank to the bottom like quicksand. The problem was that it seemed that this entire thing was powered by Alaric's 9th stage ability. This was all part of his chain reaction. This meant that all the other magnetics in the game were subject to something that they couldn't fight against. The only person still left standing was Alaric, who was immune to his own ability. And surprisingly, there was also one person who remained at their feet. That's Michael. How did he not get affected by that? Many were thinking that this was just a mere coincidence, but there were a few who clearly saw what happened. I saw him move. Before everything collapsed, he deliberately stepped towards a tree, as if he knew that it was going to happen. But of course many still couldn't believe that he was able to do that. After all, if even Potbull couldn't guess what the chain reaction was going to do, then how would Michael have been able to do it? Michael, seeing the events leading up to the erosion, managed to reach a solid part of the ground in time. Not only that, but he had maneuvered his main drone to put itself in between Alaric's AP and his ability. He smiled after seeing the charge. 50%. Chapter 618, Easy Charging. As expected of an ability coming from a 9th stage magnetic, he reached half a full charge from a single attack. This was also because of how large of a scope this chain reaction had been as well. It practically extended to almost a quarter of the entire pocket dimension itself. Harbinger was right. Getting 300% battery charge would be a lot easier than he thought. The amount of AP that a 9th stage magnetic had was staggering. Okay, time to charge my batteries some more. With his main drone focused on Alaric, he had his mini drone follow Potbull very closely. Potbull quickly got out of the hole he was being buried in and created some distance between him and Alaric. His shoulder was injured with blood leaking to his clothes and his armor. But he didn't seem to care. Injuries like these were nothing in the front of a knight like him. Potbull spat on the ground and quickly charged towards Alaric with his battle axe skidding against the ground. Alaric used his chain and shot it towards Potbull, but Potbull swung his axe and deflected it to the side. But imbued with the chain reaction ability, the chain bounced off a rock and a tree, making a complete 180-degree turn and shooting towards Potbull's back. Just then Michael saw the Godforge pieces in Potbull's heart start to glow with an intense orange light. He's going to use his invulnerability, he realized. In that same moment he used his mini-drone and dived down towards Potbull. He needed extreme focus and precision with this maneuver, making sure that he only grazed past the invisible barrier of invincibility around Potbull's body. He didn't even pilot his main drone at this point and solely had his attention to his mini-drone. The chain imbued with a 9th stage power shot towards Potbull's back with its sharp-edged end. But at that same moment Potbull activated his ability, turning himself invincible for a very moment and causing the chain to bounce off his skin powerless. Meanwhile, in the heat of the moment, Michael dropped down his mini-drone and successfully grazed past Potbull's head. Knowing how sensitive knights could be, he didn't spend a second taking in the energy. He dipped in and out as fast as possible before making his escape upwards. Mini-drone battery, 45%. And just as he expected, even with that small dip, he was almost able to get half of his battery charged to full. Still, he didn't get greedy. As the fight between Alaric and Potbull continued, he made sure to pick his timing carefully. He would only swoop down with his drone during the heat of the battle, where both Alaric and Potbull were clashing together fiercely and with their focus put solely on themselves. He also couldn't do it too often because he knew that they would start to get suspicious as to why their ability powers would start to deplete more than they actually should. It wasn't long before he had 100% on both of his batteries with no one the wiser. That was easier than I thought. He quickly retrieved the batteries from the drone and transferred them over to his own battery source. His chest now had 4 batteries attached to it, with 3 of them at full charge and 1 at 27%. I can finally use the quantum slash. He was very tempted to just do it out of pure curiosity. But he knew that this was not the time to show off his powers. He had to save it for the next game, where 15 drops of Su were on the line. But at that moment an explosion suddenly rang out from a distance. Michael had to take his attention away from Alaric and Potbull for a second to look at what happened on the other side of the battlefield. Throughout this whole time, Aerith, Bobby, and the rest of the remaining Legacy Alliance were fighting against the Knights and the Wizards. It was a fierce battle. Aerith and Bobby were in a severe disadvantage with their numbers a lot lower than the Knights and the Mages. At the moment there was no side that was winning over the other. And suddenly this balance was broken with the appearance of a single person. A chubby teenager with cheeks like a steamed bun entered the scene. Ha 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 ha. Feast your eyes, everyone. For I have arrived. The teen was laughing to himself, with the rolls in his belly shaking with each laugh. If anyone saw this out of context, they would have thought that this was a silly skit. However, the faces of the Legacy Alliance turned grim as they saw this. He was none other than Braxton Higgs, the genius from the Guild of Arcana, and hailed to be the next mystic master of the world. "I'ma get the flag, I'ma get the flag." Braxton hummed with his head swinging side to side, as if he was just taking a leisurely stroll down the park. As soon as Dickie heard this, he turned nervous. Oh no, he's coming for the flags. What do we do? His anxiety was well warranted. After all, in this current battlefield, there was no one else that could come anywhere close to defeating Braxton. Alaric was busy fighting Potbull. Aerith and Bobby were also embroiled in a battle against the Knights and the Mages. This left only Michael and Dickie to fend for the flags. Braxton casually floated in the air, casting 100 magic circles with ease. And in a single moment an army of pigs manifested in the air, each one seemingly wearing an armor of their own. These pigs had fierce looks on their eyes, as if they were ready to take down any opponent that came their way. And at this moment their only goal was the 4 flags in the distance. My little piggies. Go and get those flags for me, MK? Braxton commanded his piggies to go forward, and suddenly the pigs burst forth with all kinds of magic deep from their very bodies. They seemed to each be giving off the power of a 7-star magician. Anyone who saw this was immediately amazed by his powers. As expected of a future mystic master. He's truly powerful in magic. That's hundreds of 7-star monsters. I didn't even think that was possible. Meanwhile, the Tower Master watching this from above wasn't at all impressed by what he was seeing. You are good, Braxton. But you shouldn't have been late in the auction. If you knew then, you wouldn't have made this mistake. And in that moment everyone saw Michael raise his hands against the horde of pigs coming his way. And a few seconds later Braxton suddenly felt something stir within his cores. It was a feeling he had never felt before. It was as if the mana in his body was leaving him and the mana that he had cast was cut off from him. Wah! Then the pigs shook as if they couldn't control their own bodies. No! My piggies! Braxton screeched out. His beloved piggies turned around and faced him instead. His magic spell was stripped away from him. Chapter 619, Braxton's Attack. Braxton was flabbergasted seeing his little piggies get taken away from him. No matter how hard he grasped the magic he had put out, he couldn't get a hold of them. The mana themselves were shying away from him. Never in his life did this ever happen before. Even when he was training with the Mystic Masters, they had never fully taken his mana away from him. They could challenge his magic, trying to make him lose his grip, but they would never succeed. He always had full control over his own. Hailed and trained as the next up and coming Mystic Master, he always thought that he was better than anyone when it came to magic. He thought he knew everything. But this was the unknown. For the first time in his life, he felt alien to the mana that had once been like his own limb. And this wasn't done to him by his seniors. This wasn't done by the so-called masters of the mystic arts. This was done by a child with golden hair, younger only to him by a few years. Braxton narrowed his eyes, gaze filled with competitiveness. He felt his blood boiling, not with anger but with excitement. He had always been stronger than his peers, defeating them with ease. Could this boy be the challenge he'd been wishing for? Who are you? Braxton asked. Michael. Braxton smiled. Michael? I am Braxton Higgs, and our battle will be legendary, he announced with his voice booming up to the crowd above. As soon as he said this, people became anxious for Michael. Although many could agree that Michael was way more talented than Braxton when it came to the mystic arts, that didn't mean that he could overcome the gap between a 4th stage cultivation and the peak of the 9th stage. Damn. Alaric is caught up with his fight with Potbowl. Aerith and Bobby are also occupied with the knights and the mages. Michael's done. Braxton raised his wand with its pristine red glow, showing it to be as near to perfect as a mithril relic could be. The power of magic and abilities swirled in the air, with the reality around Braxton slowly bending to his will. And as soon as Dickie saw this, he immediately panicked. Let's escape. We just have to wait a little bit longer and we'll have our help. Aerith and Bobby will defeat those guys in a few moments. Dickie turned to run away, wanting to protect the flags they've gathered. They had 5 flags. If Braxton caught them, all of their efforts would be for naught. But Michael stayed behind. What are you doing? Let's run. There's no point, Michael muttered. He would have caught up to us no matter what we did. Dickie pursed his lips, knowing that Michael was right. But running away still gave them a chance, even if it was close to 0. Catch, he said as he threw the green flag to Dickie, who flusteredly juggled it in his hands with a surprised look on his face. You're not doing what I think you're doing, right? Dickie asked hurriedly. Because in my perspective it looks like you want to stay behind and fight Braxton. Michael nodded. He's aiming for me. I'll distract him and you run away with the flags. Are you crazy? If we don't stand a chance, then you won't. Because of the situation, Dickie had no choice but to say the truth bluntly. But even with that, Michael still stayed behind, adamant in his decision. And before Dickie could persuade Michael again, Braxton finally made his move. Waving his wand around, he pointed at Michael. Stacked giant magic circles appeared in the air, creating a 3D shape with complex geometry. With his drone vision, Michael saw a combination of both mana and ability power weaved into the very fabric of Braxton's spell. One look and Michael knew that he didn't have the physical or magical ability to escape from this power. He had to use his quantum abilities. He had 327% battery charge at the moment, meaning if he dipped into his own ability power, he could use his quantum step and his very new quantum slash. Granted, he had never used it before, he was confident that the heat of the battle would allow him to bring out the quantum slash at the moment he needed it the most. The surge of magic and ability power inside the layered magic circle reached a peak. Barnaby was going to shoot. A large projection of Braxton's face manifested in the air, with his expression in a stern and puckered face, as if using his lips as a spear itself. and then the projected face shot towards Michael. In normal people's eyes, everything happened in an instant. They saw a blur and the face shot towards Michael without a moment of delay. A deafening shockwave rang out, even making the crowd recoil from their seats. Once everything settled down, they peeked back into the pocket dimension and saw a large hole from where Michael stood. It was a hole in the perfect size and shape of Braxton's projected face. Dickie stood there with his hand outstretched towards where Michael stood. He was too late. Everyone was silent. They knew Michael would get eliminated one way or another, but they didn't think that it would be in such a gruesome manner. If the pocket dimension security protocol wasn't in place, then Michael would have turned into pure mist. They all looked down at the stage thinking they would see Michael's unconscious body teleported to safety. But it was empty. A gasp rang out from the crowd pointing at the pocket dimension. Many more followed suit. 10 meters away from the giant hole in the ground, Michael kneeled on the ground safe. What? Did any of you just see that? What happened? Some people were still watching the fight between Alaric and Potbowl, and their attention was only pulled away once people began pointing at the other side of the battlefield. No one could figure out how Michael was able to dodge away from Braxton's attack at the last second. Everything occurred faster than the blink of an eye. Yet Michael was still somehow able to escape unharmed yet again. For many who were paying attention, this was not the first time Michael had somehow dodged an undodgeable attack. Many were now speculating that this was no accident nor a lucky break. He dodged that for sure. What? How can he? He's good at magic, but Braxton's attack was filled with his 9th stage ability. There's no way that Michael could have even seen or dodged away from that. Yet the outcome was clear. Michael stayed in the game against an attack from Braxton. Dickie looked at Michael with his jaws wide open. 1 second Michael seemed to have disintegrated into the dust, and the next second he was on the other side of the hole. That's not possible. Even Braxton was left speechless. Unlike everyone, he saw everything as clear as day. He saw Michael disappear at the very moment that the attack was about to hit him, meaning that he outmaneuvered an attack from a 9th stage magnetic. Chapter 620. Interrupted. Braxton's head fell to his shoulders. His body started to shake. Ha! 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 This might be the single greatest day I've ever had. Michael exceeded all of his expectations and more. Somehow Michael not only had a better grasp of the mystic arts than him, but he also showed that he had a hidden speed that could even surpass that of his attacks. Michael! Michael! Michael, oink oink. Braxton charged towards Michael at extremely fast speeds, with his expression showing complete and utter adoration for him. Michael was caught off guard at first. He was expecting a violent, almost angry retaliation after what he had just shown off. Not only did he completely take over the magical pigs and render them useless, but he also showed that he could easily dodge Braxton's attack. He would have thought that Braxton would want to regain his pride as the renowned future mystic master. But instead there was an expression of borderline obsessive look on Braxton's face. He clicked the switch in his hands with the Unity Saber flashing into existence. He then closed his eyes, gathering the power from his Godforged pieces and commanding his ability power to gather at his hands. His mind reeled back to Harbinger's demonstration as he copied every single thing that his diva did to execute the quantum slash. Reality started to warp around his wrists as he raised the Unity Saber above his head. He was ready to unleash the strongest attack he had ever attained. The only thing that he had to do was use the 300% AP charge on his battery, boosting the power in his hands to let the warping of reality transition into the ripping of the fabric of space. With Braxton bearing down on him, he brought down his Unity Saber, about to unleash it, when all of a sudden, he heard the sound of horns echoing out from the skies above. Toot Toto 2. Everyone stopped in their tracks as the pocket dimension itself started to transport their bodies back into the auction area. Alaric and Potbowl, who were still engaged in a fierce fight, looked dissatisfied as their fight got interrupted. As for Aerith and Bobby, their faces turned into shock and disappointment as they realized what this all meant. They looked towards Dickie, who held all 5 flags in their possession. He was now on the ground unconscious as men in black and white suits gathered around him. These were none other than the Secret Service of the royal family, the Duchess' personal guards and servants. All 7 flags were in their possession. Somehow, in the heat of all the intense battles, everyone completely forgot that there was one other group in the game. These Secret Service men, like their namesake, kept their presence hidden throughout this whole game and waited for the opportune moment to strike. And all of their waiting paid off. While everyone was busy fighting each other, they stole the flags right under everyone's noses, getting them the win for the bid. The winner has been decided. Players returned to the stage. Barnaby announced, his voice echoing throughout all the corners of the pocket dimension. Just as Braxton and Michael were about to clash, they were teleported back into the stage. Michael found himself back in the auction room, staring at the crowd around him. He quickly unclicked the switch, turning off the Unity Saber. That was close. I almost had to use my quantum slash. He treated his new quantum techniques as his trump cards. He didn't want to use them at all if possible so that he could have the element of surprise during the next game where 15 drops of sue was on the line. Oink, oink. Michael shivered. He looked to his side and saw Braxton looking at him with a smile on his face. What's up with him? Congratulations to the Duchess and the royal family. You have won the bidding for the automobile for 1 billion gold coins. Everyone looked up and clapped at the Duchess visible from her VIP room. She was twisting her wrist around, which was the way that royals waved at other people. The two Secret Service who won her the bid bowed down to her, showing their deference. Damn, I completely forgot about those guys. That's the Secret Service. That's what they're good at. I'm sure the legacies aren't too happy about that. They almost had the game on their hands. They had all 5 flags. As expected, Alaric, Bobby, and Aerith could only stare at the automobile on stage with longing in their faces. They tried so hard and had to sacrifice so many players in the game, but in the end they still lost the bidding. While everyone was still reeling from the abrupt ending for the game, Barnaby quickly took to the stage and announced their next game. As you all know, our game for the 15 drops of sue will immediately commence after the previous game's conclusion. Alaric, Bobby, and Aerith's disappointment became more clear after this announcement. After all, Aerith and Alaric only had one member from their team left still standing. The others were knocked out and unconscious, meaning that they couldn't participate in the next game. Bobby had no members left on his team, which meant that he'd have to go in the game alone. As for the Knights, Potbowl and 2 others were left still standing. For the Mages, Braxton and 1 other fellow was still viable to play. And as for the Secret Service men, they had 2 members still left on their team. They were the ones who had sneaked throughout the battlefield and stole all the flags from the other teams. All in all, the players for this next match were less than half of the original players in the game. The game for the automobiles had proven to be quite brutal. This only goes to show how much people wanted to obtain these next-level technological advancements. Kukuku. Michael, are you ready to go all out? Harbinger's question was more of a suggestion. There was nothing that the diva would like more than Michael having to fight magnetics 3 to 4 stages above him. I think I'll do the stealth method this time. It worked for the Secret Service, I think it'll work for me. He was planning on scouting ahead with his drones, maybe even charging them for a little bit at a time and only showing off his new powers when the sue drops were on the line. Suddenly he shivered again. That guy's still looking at me, he said, side-eyeing Braxton. That could pose a problem. After all, it looked like Braxton was raring to continue where they left off from the game. Nope, I'll have to avoid him at all costs. No fighting till I'm sure I'm getting my sue drops. He looked at Braxton and memorized the light mana signatures coming from his body. Not only that, but he secretly used his drone to peer through his Godforge pieces and also memorized the heat signature for his ability powers. Just then Barnaby looked at everyone and opened his hands wide. Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready for the finale for tonight's auction? Chapter 621. Final game. Everyone looked excited upon Barnaby's announcement. Things had gotten heated up and there were a lot of fights still left unresolved during the game. For example, the fight between Potbowl and Alaric was still undecided, which meant that the title for the strongest magnetic in all of Metropolis was still yet to be crowned. Aside from that, there were also some unresolved questions still yet to be answered. Michael's unexplained survival was one of them. Not only was Michael able to survive to the next game despite almost half of the players being eliminated, but he was also able to take on Braxton's attack head-on and somehow still remained unscathed. There were a lot of theories as to how that happened. Some thought that Braxton got uncharacteristically sloppy and accidentally missed his aim, and some thought that there were some hidden helpers that transported Michael away into safety. But in this game, all questions would finally be answered. After all, the fight for the 15 drops of sue was a free-for-all. There were no teams, no alliances, and no groups. Michael would have to rely on himself to survive, and this time the crowd would be fully attentive to his actions. Barnaby snapped his fingers with the magicians under his employ, creating magic circles that changed the pocket dimension on the stage. The platforms briefly clasped together before separating again as the wizards finished their incantation. This time, the pocket dimension below the hole was completely different from the game before. Players and spectators alike. For this last bidding game, I have pulled out all the stops and prepared a magnificent playground for everyone to enjoy. Barnaby peered down the pocket dimension and described the rules of the game. As you can see, our new game is located on a very small island floating in the middle of the sky. This map was about 4 times smaller than the map from before, meaning that the players would be able to see each other much more frequently than before, which would lead to more fights and encounters. The objective of the game is simple. You must get to the center of the island and obtain the 15 drops of sue located in the circle. Right in the middle of the floating island, there was a red platform with 15 pillars grouped up in the center. The players immediately noticed the individual vials on the pillars with no locks, no cages, and no other obstacles. Alaric, Bobby, and all the other leaders of the major factions became contemplative as they realized the point of the game. Ha ha ha! You all must be aware of it now. I designed this game to be as straightforward as it can be. All players will be teleported at the edge of the island at the very same time. And at the moment you arrive in the pocket dimension you shall run as fast as possible to the very center of the island and claim the drops of Sue as your prize. This immediately made the crowd erupt in discussions. It's just a race. Wow. There's no magnetic in the game that specializes in speed, which means that they will all arrive at the center at relatively the same time. Yeah. Those 9th stage magnetics are going to be the first ones there for sure. I can only imagine what kind of chaos would erupt once they faced each other at the platform. To obtain the 15 drops of Sue on the platform, all they had to do was physically grab the vial on the pillars. That was it. The earliest bird gets the worm. But because this was everyone's objective, this meant that there would be a lot of fighting and clashes around the platform to prevent others from seizing the drops for themselves. Michael looked down at the pocket dimension and felt that this was good for him. The fact that all he had to do was grab the vial was good for him because he could see a chance in which he could sneak at least a single bottle during the midst of the chaos. I just have to get there before the others get all of them. His speed wasn't all that great compared to the other 9th stage magnetics. Physically, they were better than him. He only had a chance if he used magic or his quantum steps. But of course he had to spend the AP in his battery to do that, which would put him below the 300% mark, making him unable to use the quantum slash whenever he wanted. Okay, I guess I'll have to sacrifice a bit of energy to do it. I'll be able to recoup it anyway during the fight on the platform. Just as he was stretching his body, he was suddenly approached by 2 guys in black and white suits. Greetings, Sir Michael. He had never seen them before, but he knew that they were the Duchess Secret Service. I am 003 and this is my teammate 004. We are the only ones left on our team. The 2 bowed at him respectfully. They knew that Michael had a good relationship with the Duchess. Hi. Nice work you did there. I never even noticed that you guys got the flag, he said, genuinely complimenting them. Of course, if he wasn't preoccupied with Braxton, then he would have seen them with his drones. We would like to offer you our help during this next game, 003 said, surprising Michael. Really? Why? I thought you guys wanted the Sue drops for yourselves. 004 then pointed at the top of the auction, showing that the Duchess was looking down at them with a smile, particularly at Michael. The Duchess has only tasked us to get the automobiles at all costs. She doesn't care about the Sue drops, 004 revealed. He was very touched after hearing that. He looked back up at the Duchess and gave her a nod of thanks, which was reciprocated by a small curtsy from the royal. She's buttering me up. He knew that she was only doing this because she knew the value he brought to the table. His automobiles, his soda, his connection with the fairies and the dwarves. 15 drops of Sue was nothing compared to the connections he had. Well, it's definitely working. I'll have to thank her after this. I appreciate that, he said to 003 and 004, shaking their hands. We must warn you that we are not capable of defeating Alaric or Potbowl, 003 said, tempering Michael's expectations. Although we are confident that we can get at least 1 drop of Sue for you. That we promise, said 004, thumping his heart. After the Secret Service's unexpected win, a lot of the teams were now extremely wary of them. Their tactics won't work a second time. That's all right with me, he said. All I need you to do is get my shadow clone all the way to the center of the pocket dimension and I'll be able to teleport there. 003 and 004 nodded with seriousness. This is great. If I believe in their skills, then they'll be able to get me at least 1 drop. But I really want more. Chapter 622. Before the race. It wasn't long before Barnaby started his countdown. On my count, all of you will be teleported on the outskirts of the pocket dimension. As soon as that happens, the game starts and the drops of Sue are for yours to take. 10, 9, 8. While Barnaby was counting down, Michael felt another look from beside him. It was Braxton again, who was waving at him as if they were lifelong friends. The guy was mouthing some words that Michael had no interest in hearing. I'll see you down there and we'll play. Of course, Michael had no intention of wasting his time with Braxton. Hopefully he wouldn't get placed anywhere near the guy. 4, 3, 2, 1 go. Barnaby said, screaming to the top of his lungs. All the players surrounding the stage felt their bodies start to shimmer in and out of existence. Everyone had their stances ready, with some with their hands down on the ground and mimicking a world-class running athlete. Then finally a surge of mana enveloped his body before he was teleported straight into the pocket dimension. 1 second he was staring at the crowd cheering loudly at him, and the next he was looking at a thick jungle ecosystem with the trees blocking his view of the horizon. 003 and 004 are probably already running towards the center. Since they were in the 8th stage of body formation, he was confident that they would at least keep up with the big leagues like Alaric and Potbowl. I guess I should start practicing my quantum slash. That was his ace in the hole, one that he could use at an opportune moment to obtain a few more drops of Sue. He looked down at his chest and saw the 3 blocks of batteries ready to be used. Reaching down his pockets, he retrieved his Unity Saber switch. With a single click, the Unity beam manifested in reality at near the speed of light. But just as he was about to close his eyes and concentrate, he immediately jumped backwards and dodged away from an object speeding at him directly. Braxton fell from the skies and landed face first into wet muddy ground. Oink oink. Found you, friend. Michael frowned as he looked at Braxton's face submerged in mud. Him again? What's up with my luck today? He would have rathered that Potbowl or Alaric chased after him than Braxton. This guy was just a little bit weird, but strangely not in a bad way. Braxton could have attacked him, but he sensed no hostility coming from the guy. Though he was pretty sure that if he didn't dodge away, then he would get tackled into the mud with him. Why are you following me? Braxton floated up from the mud and casted a simple water magic to get the dirt and grime off his body and clothes. It's because you're like me. You're friends with mana too. He had never heard that phrasing before. Friends with mana? Yep. Braxton nodded. Mana follows you around like you're some kind of magnet like me. Because of his supreme skill, he had absolute control over any mana in the natural world. He could control them, he could repel them, but he wouldn't say that he could converse with them, much more be friends with them. Okay. So? Braxton frowned and crossed his arms. You're not even treating the mana like they're your friends. He raised his hands innocently. I don't know what you're talking about. His reply seemed to have frustrated Braxton. Let's see who's better friends with them between us. Let's have a battle. A mystical battle. No abilities, no divas. This actually wasn't that bad of an outcome than I thought. If he was going to fight Braxton, then this was the best condition that could have happened. Braxton beat him in cultivation, but he was absolutely better than him in magic. Alright, sure. But if I win, you'll let me leave and go for the drops. Braxton punched his own hand in excitement. Agreed. I don't care about those drops anyway. Meanwhile, the Tower Master and the rest of the wizards watching this from up above couldn't help but smack their heads in disappointment. What is Braxton doing? What does he mean he doesn't care about the drops? We do. And he says he won't use his abilities. That's his only advantage against Michael. The Tower Master could only blame himself for this. I should have been more stern with him. If he had just listened to what I had to say about Michael, then he would have known who he was going up against. Braxton raised his wand, manifesting 3 different magic circles at the same time, each one glowing with a different light. One was blue, symbolizing his mastery over the water element. The other was red, symbolizing his mastery over the fire element. And the last one was white, symbolizing his mastery over the light element. Braxton then did something that Michael had only ever seen once before. He started to maneuver the magic circles to stack upon each other, creating a new kind of depth to the magic. With a single wave of Braxton's hands, a small pig manifested from the circle with its entire body simultaneously showing water, fire, and light elements combined to each other without any issues. What do you think? I'm the bestest friend of mana. Braxton bragged, turning up his head and showing his slight double chin. Michael was impressed. This was a new way of casting a magic spell that he had never seen before. The benefit of doing it this way is that one can ensure that the elements wouldn't clash against each other. It's a really good technique. If ChatJK4 was still active, then it would have for sure already snatched up the magic theory in a split second. But because it was still updating, he had to do it manually. If I can fully master this, then I'm pretty sure that I can finally create magic using the Unity mana. He was starting to wonder why he had only seen this now. But then he remembered that Braxton was no ordinary individual. The chubby teen was a genius from the Guild of Arcana, who could be considered as the greatest keepers of the mystic arts. This technique was probably locked in their vaults and only taught to students like Braxton. I'm going to have to visit the Guild of Arcana in the future. His only magic spell using Unity was the Unity gun. But if he could learn the stacking technique, then he could expand his repertoire endlessly. What do you think? Impressed? Braxton said with a bit of an arrogant look on his face. Yeah, actually, I am. Michael then raised his hand and manifested 4 magic circles in the air, each one having a different color than the other. It was water, earth, air, and fire, the 4 basic elements. Using the technique he saw from Braxton, he controlled the magic circles to converge upon each other, creating a stack a couple of inches in depth. As soon as Braxton saw this, his jaws dropped to the ground. Chapter 623, Braxton Higgs. Braxton was actually speechless. He tried to utter a word, but it just came out as nothing more than unintelligible grunts. He didn't know which to be surprised at. The fact that Michael had 4 element masteries, or the fact that he could do the stacking technique even though he'd only seen it once. How? Even though Braxton was hailed as a once-in-a-thousand-year genius of the mystic arts, it still took him a couple of years before he mastered the technique of stacking magic circles. And even then, he was still one of the fastest people to ever learn it. But now he was looking at a boy 3 years younger than him perform the same technique he spent years mastering. There was no way that Michael could have learned it before this. The technique was locked in their vault, and the only way one could learn it was if they were recommended by a mystic master to study at the Guild of Arcana to become a mystic master. Just then Michael's stacked magic circles started to shake with instability. Braxton knew that this would happen. After all, Michael couldn't have grasped the magic theory without a year of learning textbooks. Still, it was very impressive that he could even stack the magic circles together. But just a couple of seconds later, the magic circles started to suck the mana in the surrounding area, using it to stabilize its structure. It was long after that did mana in the magic circle coalesce into the form of a pig, one that had a body made out of earth, a skin made out of water, flames billowing out around it, and was floating in midair. Braxton was once again speechless. He did it. Michael not only executed the technique to completion, but he also did it in the hardest way possible. The combination of the 4 basic elements, earth, water, fire, and air, always resulted in an enormous explosion of mana. This was why performing the technique with those mana was almost impossible and only existed in theory. Oink! Braxton stared wide-eyed at the magnificent pig in front of him. He was completely enamored. You have 4. And just as Braxton turned around to question Michael about his talent in the mystic arts, he saw him creating a new set of magic circles in the air. And this time the colors of these ones were completely different from the ones before. Michael was trying to create another combination of the 4 other elements. Light, dark, poison, and lightning. 8 element masteries. Braxton exploded out, unable to control his surprise anymore. Michael ignored him and summoned a new pig, one that was completely the opposite of the first pig he created. It had all the elements he used combined into one without creating any destructive reactions from the mana. I can now combine 4 elements together with this. But using all 8 and creating 8 elements is still too complicated for now. He'd have to either learn the technique from the Guild of Arcana or ask Braxton if he knew how. Hey, I know that we're in the middle of the fight. Just as he was speaking to Braxton, the guy suddenly jumped into the 2 elemental pigs and hugged them tightly. Michael cringed away after seeing that, knowing the inevitable that would happen. As Braxton hugged the 2 piggies, the 8 elements assaulted his body, making his hair stand up on end as if he was electrocuted. Taking the full brunt of the energy, Braxton kept hugging the pigs without care, even if it was injuring him. Once the energy was depleted, the pigs dematerialized and Braxton fell to the ground face first, with his body still smoking from being incinerated. Worth it. This guy is definitely crazy, Michael, though, shaking his head. A second later, Braxton jumped up from the ground with renewed vigor. He looked at Michael with a huge smile on his face. And with a smile, Braxton opened his arms and charged at Michael as if wanting to crush him to death. Michael immediately jumped away. Don't run away. Of course, this was just a signal for Michael to run away harder. Braxton casted a spell, creating a lasso made out of water to catch Michael before he could run away. Michael raised his hand and wrestled for control over Braxton's lasso. Just as the water lasso was catch Michael in its loop, it suddenly stopped in its tracks. It shivered for a second before reversing its trajectory and looping around Braxton, instead making him trip and lose his balance. So you can control even my own mana? Braxton bellowed out in excitement. You're the most interesting person I've ever met. Braxton broke out of his own lasso and started running towards Michael again. Please be my friend. Michael stopped in his tracks, turning around with a confused look on his face. What? Please be my friend? Braxton pleaded. In a game meant for fighting, it was really weird to hear someone say that they want to be your friend. Why? Because you can understand me. No one has ever been more talented than me, so that means we can be friends. For a brief moment, Michael saw a flash of pain in Braxton's eyes. There was loneliness in his gaze, one that he frequently saw in the mirror back in his previous life. He went silent. When he showed off his talents, all the people around him completely supported him with praise. He also found friends and allies who accepted him for who he was. But Braxton could have lived a completely different life. He might have been outcast for being too talented in the mystic arts. He could have been bullied, ostracized for standing head and shoulders above others, making him feel alone. So in Braxton's mind, he thought that he could only have a real friendship with someone that was much more talented than he was. That way no one would be jealous and ruin the friendship. It was kind of sad. I guess I could be your friend. Braxton immediately perked up. Really? He then charged towards Michael, wanting a hug. Whoa there, buddy. But it was too late. He was bear hugged by the chubby Braxton. Can you let me go now? Braxton finally pulled away, but still had the biggest smile on his face. Now I have a friend. Michael chuckled, feeling a bit embarrassed. Braxton wasn't all that bad of a guy. The man just needed a hug. Ahem. So can I go to the center now? I still really want to get the drops. Braxton immediately nodded. Sure. As long as we're still besties after the auction. Besties? Okay, thanks. But then a thought popped up in his head. What if he asked for a small bit of favor from Braxton? He took out a battery from his pockets and presented it to him. Can you take this and give me a little bit of your ability power? Braxton took the battery and immediately poured energy into it, without hesitation and with no questions asked. Okay, bestie. Chapter 624. Guilty as charged. 10%, 20%, 30%. Michael's eyes widened as he saw the battery's charge go up to near half in just a few seconds. He looked at Braxton, who was just giving him a nice innocent smile like a golden retriever dog. This guy is too nice. He almost felt bad that he was taking advantage of Braxton's kindness to get more AP charge for his batteries. It didn't take a minute before the battery was fully charged and Braxton could no longer put any more power into it. He returned it to Michael and eagerly awaited his next task. "Thanks. I really appreciate this," he said genuinely. "No probs. Anything for my bestie." Guilt-ridden Michael had to promise to pay him back. "I'll repay this favor some other time. No worries. I would do anything for my friends." He truly didn't want to take advantage of such an innocent kid, but he knew that he had to get as much charge as he possibly could going into this final game. He just had to pay him back with an equally worthy gift in the future. "I'll have to get this guy his own mithril artifact just to get rid of this heavy feeling in my heart." Braxton immediately took in the batteries that Michael handed to him and charged it with his own ability power. It wasn't long before he had 2 fully charged batteries in his storage, bringing up his total to 500%. "Aren't you getting tired?" he asked Braxton. "No," Braxton replied as he charged another battery. "The energy that this little thing takes is just a small drop of my own reserves. It's nothing special, really." After hearing this, Michael didn't feel that bad anymore. For him, 100% charge was something that was more than 10 times his own ability power reserves. But for people like Braxton, who were in the peak of the 9th stage body formation realm, 100% charge was like a spoonful of water against a huge lake. "Dear bestie." He received the 3rd fully charged battery, giving him 6 now in total, enough for 2 quantum slashes. He gave Braxton another battery and he began pouring in AP just like the other times. But at this moment Michael suddenly felt a stirring in the mana around him. "Sir Michael, we have arrived near the center of the pocket dimension. We have the drops of Sue in our sights." 003's voice echoed out from the shadow underneath his feet. It seemed that they had successfully found the platform containing the drops of Sue. This made his blood boil with excitement. "Are there any other players near here?" he asked them. "Yes, Sir Michael. There are a couple of other players facing off against each other. We have remained in stealth for now, but we are sure that we would get swarmed as soon as we step close to the platform," 004 reported. From what it looks like, it seemed that there were a couple of people who had already arrived at the platform. However, they were refusing to go anywhere near it because they were afraid that they would get attacked by all the other players lying in wait. "Okay, I'll be right there," he replied to them. Seeing as the game seemed to have reached a critical junction, Michael couldn't wait any longer. He had to get there now or risk someone else getting to the drops first. So as much as he wanted to charge his batteries some more, he needed to go. "Sorry, Braxton. But I gotta go," he said, taking back the battery. It only had about a 60% battery charge on it, which was more than enough for what he needed. And without further ado, he cast his shadow transportation spell. The black shadow underneath his feet expanded outwards and covered his whole body, making him switch places with the shadow clones he put with the Secret Service guys. With Michael leaving, Braxton just waved his hand goodbye. "Good luck." Michael opened his eyes and found himself atop a tree resting on a thick branch. Beside him was 003 and 004, who were staying as still as a rock and not making a sound. If he weren't looking at them directly, then they would have blended right into the leaves as if they were part of the tree. They both signaled for Michael to keep his voice low, so he nodded and opted to use hand signals to communicate with them. 003 pointed at a seemingly normal bush about 20 meters away from them. "There's 2 people hiding there," 003 whispered. "And 3 more hiding opposite them." 004 then pointed at a much further point in the forest, showing Michael a fight between one of Alaric's teammates and a mage. And of course, even if they didn't point towards north, Michael already noticed the platform in the very middle of the forest. In the center of a clearing there was a red platform about 2 inches off the ground. Containing this platform were 15 pillars, which were spaced out evenly amongst each other. Michael saw the vial of Sue closest to him, and he immediately felt a temptation to just rush there and grab it before anybody could react. With his quantum step, it was more than possible. But the problem would be what came after that. His technique would have been seen by everyone lying in wait. The element of surprise would no longer be on his side, and with all the other players coming for him, he would quickly get eliminated from contention easily. "I have to wait until someone else comes and tries to take a drop." This was what the others planned as well. It was just then that in the midst of hushed silences and muffled heartbeats, heavy footsteps suddenly echoed around the forest. It was loud. Whoever was walking had no intention of ever hiding his presence at all. And once everyone looked at who it was, they understood his confidence. It was a man with a tall, lanky build with a bald head like that of a monk, wearing minimal armor and wielding a giant turquoise battle axe on his back. It was Pot Bowl. The man walked leisurely towards the platform, coming closer to the drops than anyone ever had. Everyone was on their guard. With Pot Bowl being one of the strongest fighters in Metropolis, they didn't want to be the first one to fight him. But it seemed that everyone was afraid as well, which only gave Pot Bowl more time to approach the drops. Eventually Pot Bowl reached the edge of the red platform. Just one step and he would be within reach of the drops of Sue. He took the step and suddenly a few figures burst out of their hiding spots and charged at Pot Bowl. One of Potball's teammates immediately intercepted some of Potball's enemies, stopping them in their tracks. In a flash, Potball was face to face with 3 8th-stage magnetics who were baring their arms at him. But not all players charged at Potball. They were smart. They instead used the timing of the chaos to go for the drops instead. Michael was one of them. Chapter 625. High-speed moments. Michael dashed out of the leaves. His target was the pillar closest to him. It was the easiest way to get a drop of Sue, and it was also in the opposite space where Potable was fighting. And as he looked to his left and right, he saw Aerith and Bobby also going for the same pillar of Sue he was going for. I could use my quantum step now. Aerith, Bobby, and a few other players noticed his presence. But luckily for him, their attention was on each other. Aerith and Bobby were considered one of the strongest magnetics as well, given that they were in the 9th stage of body formation. Comparatively, Michael was only in the 4th stage. His speed and danger levels were nothing compared to them. In their eyes, they could easily defeat him once he got too close. So the players decided to swarm Aerith and Bobby, knowing that if they got too near the pillars, then it was basically guaranteed that they would obtain one for themselves. This gave Michael the chance to break free from the crowd. He dashed ahead with Aerith and Bobby getting bogged down by the other players. The red platform was just a few steps away from him. But it was at that moment that he felt a tingling on the back of his neck. He turned around and saw someone charge at him with a sword. The glow in his weapon, as well as the heat signature coming from his Godforge pieces, all indicated that he was in the 8th stage of body formation. In short, this was someone that could single-handedly defeat him in a single attack, even if it wasn't an ability. The man swung at him using nothing but his physicality and his pure strength. This would have been enough to defeat normal 4th stage magnetic. But this only gave Michael a chance to slip away. Michael's wrist started to bend, the very fabric of space around it creating a seemingly black hole effect around his hands. One of the 7 batteries attached to his chest spooled out a thick thread of ability power towards his hands, empowering it with enough energy to complete the warp. The man's sword swung through the air just less than an inch before it would slash through Michael's shoulder, when all of a sudden Michael disappeared from his sight. Flustered and surprised, the man lost his balance and ended up kneeling on the ground with his sword pierced into the soil. Wah! Just then a bright ray of light emerged from the skies above and shone down on the platform, specifically towards one of the pillars containing a Sue drop. Everyone quickly turned their eyes, with their expressions turning into shock and confusion as they saw Michael grabbing a hold of one of the vials. Somehow throughout all the chaos, the very weakest player in the game was the first one to get a Sue drop. No one could believe this. Could he have been so weak that no one was paying attention to him while he just casually waltzed into the platform? This was so shocking that practically everyone stopped fighting and just stared at Michael for a second. They didn't know how he did it. But for the crowd watching up above, everything was crystal clear. Michael didn't sneak past everyone. He ran ahead of everyone else, even with an 8th stage magnetic chasing after him. How did he do that? He disappeared. That's so fast. That's impossible. A 4th stage magnetic shouldn't be able to do that. The speed that Michael showcased was way beyond what was possible for someone at his level. He sped past an 8th stage magnetic. Now everyone was starting to figure out that his previous lucky incidents weren't that lucky after all. They were deliberate. Those were displays of skill. But while everyone was still reeling from this unexpected outcome, Michael kept his laser focus. Now that everyone saw his quantum step, he only had a limited time until they snapped out of their confusion. Once the vial disappeared from his hands, this signaled his ownership of the drop of Sue. He then quickly put his eyes on the next goal. He turned sideways, looking at the pillar just a few meters away from him. With the batteries on his chest filled with ability power, he had all the energy he needed to continuously use his quantum step to sweep all of the drops in the platform. But just as his hands manifested the warping of the fabric of space, he suddenly saw something move from the corner of his eyes. Based on pure instinct, he immediately changed the trajectory of his quantum step. Just as he arrived at his new spot, he turned around and saw Potball swinging his battle axe to where he was going to teleport to. Potball's face showed surprise and confusion. He looked at Michael, intrigued at the strange and powerful technique that he used to surpass even his own speed. Damn, looks like I caught the big fish. This guy was the only obstacle he had from getting all of the drops on the platform. He was sure that as soon as he turned his back on him, he would find an axe staked right through his back. I have to defeat him. No matter the impossibility, the adrenaline of the situation made Michael get rid of any unnecessary thoughts. His goal was the drops and Potball was his obstacle. He reached down his pockets and retrieved the Unity Saber switch. With a click, his weapon came to life. Potball looked intrigued, wondering how someone 5 stages lower than him would have the confidence to fight him in a one-on-one battle using weapons. Potball subtly nodded, accepting Michael's challenge. With the crowd watching above with bated breaths and nail-biting anxiousness at the clearly mismatched duel, Michael raised his Unity Saber and readied his attack. In Potball's eyes, his movements were slow like molasses, with plenty of holes and weaknesses in his stance. But Potbowl knew that Michael had a reality warping speed up his sleeves. Holding his Unity saber with both hands, Michael drew from his batteries and gathered power in his wrists. Potbowl saw the fabric of space warping around Michael's wrists, and in the next instant Michael disappeared. His eyes went wide with panic and with shock as he completely lost where Michael had disappeared to. Behind him, Michael reappeared with his hands swinging down with his Unity saber. But that wasn't all. 3 fully charged batteries from his chest suddenly burst with power as they unleashed the energy they had in store. These 3 ability power threads coalesced together, weaving into a thicker one before supplying Michael's hands with a huge surge of power. He was using his Quantum Slash. This was the perfect time, with Potbowl still a few milliseconds away from noticing his presence. The reality around the Unity saber started to warp with an intensity much more extreme than the quantum steps. The fabric of space ripped apart, creating a hole in reality and causing a bright orange light made out of high-temperature plasma to appear in front of the saber. Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today.